When Dolores Jordan visits a luxury store to buy a watch for her granddaughter's graduation, the sales manager rudely suggests she can't afford it and should shop elsewhere. Humiliated but dignified, she leaves without revealing who she is. The mother of basketball legend Michael Jordan. When Michael learns what happened, he doesn't seek revenge. Instead, mother and son return to the store together on a mission not of shame, but transformation. What follows will change not just one store, but an entire industry. As Dolores's graceful response inspires a movement teaching that true dignity isn't earned through wealth or status. It's every person's birthright. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Chicago's Magnificent Mile as Dolores Jordan made her way along the bustling sidewalk. At 65, she still carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had guided her through raising 5 children on her own. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple but elegant navy dress with sensible shoes, comfortable enough for walking but nice enough for shopping in the city's most exclusive district. Dolores paused outside, the gleaming storefront of Platinum Elite. The boutique's window displays showcased dazzling jewelry and watches that caught the sunlight, throwing tiny rainbows against the pristine glass. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and pushed open the heavy glass door. A soft chime announced her arrival, but none of the 3 sales associates looked up immediately. The store's interior was hushed and cool, with soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over glass display cases filled with luxury items. Dolores approached a counter near the center of the store where watches were displayed on velvet cushions. She had been saving for months to buy a special graduation gift for her granddaughter Jasmine, who was finishing college next month. Michael had offered to buy it, of course, but Dolores had always valued her independence. "I'd like to look at that watch, please," she said, pointing to a sleek silver timepiece with a mother-of-pearl face. The young female associate behind the counter glanced up briefly, then caught the eye of another employee across the room. Something passed between them, a look Dolores had seen many times before. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Dolores recognized it instantly. Judgment. "Just a moment," the associate said, her voice polite but cool. She disappeared into a back room. Dolores waited patiently, gazing at the other watches in the display case. She could afford any of them now, a fact that still sometimes surprised her. There had been a time when buying even a simple digital watch for one of her children had required careful budgeting. After several minutes, a man in his early 40s approached. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, and a diamond tie pin glinted at his throat. The name tag on his lapel read, "Bradley Williams, Sales Manager." "May I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted he could. "Yes," Dolores replied, with a warm smile. "I'm interested in that watch for my granddaughter's graduation." Bradley's eyes moved from Dolores's face to her dress, down to her sensible shoes, then back up. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "That particular piece is from our Celestial collection," he said, not moving to take it out. "They start at $25,000. "I'm aware of the price," Dolores said, maintaining her composure. "I'd still like to see it, please." Bradley hesitated, then reluctantly slid open the back of the case and lifted out the watch. He placed it on a velvet pad, but didn't push it toward her. "The Celestial collection is our premium line," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "They're typically purchased by our established clientele. Perhaps I could show you something from our Essentials collection? They're quite lovely and more," he paused, "accessible." The word hung in the air between them. Dolores felt her cheeks, warm slightly, but her expression remained composed. "I'd like to see this one," she repeated firmly. With visible reluctance, Bradley slid the velvet pad toward her. Dolores carefully picked up the watch, admiring its craftsmanship. It was perfect for Jasmine. Elegant but not flashy. Sophisticated but practical. "It's beautiful," she said. "I'll take it." Bradley raised his eyebrows. "Perhaps you'd like to know more about the features? It has a Swiss movement and—" "That won't be necessary," Dolores interrupted gently. "I've done my research." "Of course," Bradley said, though his tone suggested disbelief. "Will you be using financing options today?" The question stung. "No," Dolores replied. "I'll be paying in full." Bradley's skeptical expression deepened. He glanced toward the door, then back at Dolores. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice, "I hope you understand that we have a certain clientele here. These pieces represent significant investments. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the department store down the street? They have some lovely costume pieces that might better suit your situation." The words hit Dolores like a physical blow. She had experienced prejudice many times in her 70 years, growing up in the rural South, raising children during the civil rights era, even after Michael became famous. But it never failed to hurt, especially when it came so unexpectedly. For a moment, Dolores considered revealing who she was, that her son was Michael Jordan, one of the most famous and wealthy athletes in history. It would be so easy to watch Bradley's face change, to see the embarrassment and fear replace his condescension. But that wasn't who she was. James and Dolores Jordan hadn't raised their children that way. "I see," Dolores said quietly, carefully placing the watch back on the velvet pad. "Thank you for your time." She turned and walked toward the door, her back straight, her pace unhurried. Only the slight trembling of her hands betrayed her emotions. As the door closed behind her, the chimes sounding impossibly loud in her ears, Dolores felt the sting of tears. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not on Michigan Avenue where anyone might see. She walked half a block before stopping to steady herself, her hand gripping the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. In her mind, she heard James's voice from so long ago. "Hold your head high, no matter what. No one can take your dignity unless you give it to them." Dolores took a deep breath, raised her chin, and continued walking. The encounter was already becoming a small, hard knot in her chest. One more indignity that she would never share with her children. They had their own burdens to carry. They didn't need to bear hers as well. As she reached the corner and waited for the light to change, Dolores thought of her granddaughter Jasmine. Perhaps a different gift would be better after all. Something with history and meaning. Not just a pretty trinket from behind glass. Maybe the pearl necklace James had given her on their 5th anniversary. Jasmine had always admired it. The light changed, and Dolores crossed the street, leaving Platinum Elite behind. She had raised a son who changed the world, built a foundation that helped thousands of children, and maintained her dignity through unimaginable joy and heartbreak. One rude salesman couldn't take that away from her, but as she hailed a taxi to take her back to her hotel, Dolores couldn't quite shake the feeling of shame that lingered like a shadow. No matter how far you've come, she thought, some people will only ever see what they expect to see. The taxi pulled away from the curb, carrying her back toward the comfort and safety of her hotel room, where she could finally let the tears fall, in private. The taxi wound its way through Chicago's crowded streets, and Dolores gazed out the window without really seeing the city's magnificent architecture. The driver attempted small talk, but she responded with only polite murmurs, her mind replaying the humiliation at Platinum Elite. An hour later, safely behind the closed door of her hotel room, Dolores finally allowed her composure to crumble. She sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The tears were not just for today's incident, but for a lifetime of similar moments. Times when she'd been judged by her appearance rather than her character. After several minutes, she wiped her eyes and picked up her phone. 3 missed calls from Michael and a text asking if she'd found Jasmine's gift. Dolores took a deep breath and typed a simple reply. "Still looking. We'll call tomorrow. Love you." She couldn't tell him what had happened. Michael had always been protective, even as a child. Now, with his fame and resources, he would want to make things right, perhaps buy the entire store just to fire the manager. But that wasn't how she had raised him to handle problems. Dignity above all, James had always said, and she had lived by those words through every hardship. The next morning, Dolores caught an early flight back to her home in Wilmington, North Carolina. The modest but comfortable house, purchased after Michael insisted she leave the Chicago projects in 1999, had become her sanctuary. Though Michael had offered her mansions and penthouses, she had chosen this simple 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood where neighbors knew her as Ms. Dolores, not as Michael Jordan's mother. As she unpacked her small suitcase, memories flooded back. Images of the tiny apartment in Brooklyn where Michael was born, the move to Wilmington when he was 5, the cramped house where she'd raised 5 children while James worked at General Electric. She smiled, remembering Michael's first basketball hoop, a milk crate nailed to a telephone pole. Even then, he'd practice until dark, his determination visible in every movement. When he was 9, she'd saved for months to buy him proper basketball. Shoes! The salesman at the local store had been kind, treating young Michael with respect despite their modest circumstances. "These are gonna make you fly, young man," the salesman had said, and Michael had believed him. Dolores ran her fingers along the framed photos on her bedroom wall. Michael in his North Carolina uniform, James with his arm around her at their 25th anniversary, all 5 children together at James's funeral in 1993. The loss of her husband had almost broken her, but she had remained strong for her children. In the kitchen, she automatically began preparing James's favorite Sunday meal, fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet potato pie, a tradition she maintained even now. Cooking had always been her way of showing love, especially during the lean years when food on the table meant sacrifice elsewhere. She remembered Michael coming home from college, tired from games and practices, but always sitting at this same kitchen table, telling her about his dreams while she cooked. Even after becoming famous, he would return, bringing teammates who soon called her Mama Jordan, too. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Jasmine. "Grandma, Dad says you went shopping in Chicago. Did you have fun?" Dolores forced, cheerfulness into her voice. "It was nice, sweetheart. The stores are beautiful this time of year." "Did you get anything good?" Jasmine asked eagerly. "Just some ideas," Dolores said. "How are your finals going?" They chatted about Jasmine's classes, her boyfriend, and her plans after graduation. Throughout the conversation, Dolores carefully steered away from any mention of Chicago or shopping. When they finally said goodbye, she felt the weight of the unshared truth pressing down on her. Later that evening, as she watered her garden, another passion James had shared, her neighbor Elaine called over the fence. "Welcome back, Dolores. How was Chicago?" "Busy as always," Dolores replied with a practiced smile. "The city never sleeps." "Did you see Michael?" Elaine asked. Though most neighbors respected her privacy, they occasionally couldn't resist asking. "About her famous son," "Not this trip," Dolores said. "Just some shopping." Elaine nodded and continued talking about neighborhood news, unaware of Dolores's inner turmoil. This was the life she had chosen, keeping her hurts private, her disappointments buried beneath a calm exterior. It was a skill honed over decades, especially after Michael's fame had placed their family under public scrutiny. That night, unable to sleep, Dolores opened her jewelry box and took out the pearl necklace James had given her, the one she'd thought might be perfect for Jasmine. The pearls gleamed softly in the dim light, carrying memories of a night long ago when James had surprised her, having saved for months from his factory wages. He had clasped it around her neck and whispered, "Beautiful things for my beautiful wife." The necklace had been far beyond their means then, but James had insisted she deserved it. Dolores fastened the necklace and stood before the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was not the same young bride who had first worn these pearls, but time had added dignity to her features, wisdom to her eyes. No store manager could diminish that, she told herself firmly. 3 weeks passed. The Chicago incident gradually faded in intensity, though it never completely disappeared. Dolores busied herself with community work, volunteering at the local CTZ food bank and mentoring young mothers through her church program, activities that had filled her days since James's passing. She also finalized plans for her upcoming birthday celebration. Michael had insisted on hosting it at his mansion in Jupiter, Florida, where he had moved after purchasing part ownership of the Miami basketball team. Despite her protests that a simple family dinner would suffice, Michael had arranged for all, 5 children, their spouses, and her 7 grandchildren to attend. "You only turn 70 once, Mom," he had said, and she couldn't argue with that logic. On the morning of her departure for Florida, Dolores carefully packed the pearl necklace in a small gift box for Jasmine. It wasn't the brand-new watch she had planned to purchase, but it carried something more valuable: family history, love, and the dignity that had guided her through 70 years of life. As the plane took off, Dolores closed her eyes and said a silent prayer for strength to keep smiling through her birthday celebration, for wisdom to guide her grandchildren, and for the grace to forgive the store manager whose actions had wounded her more deeply than he could ever know. The luxury of Michael's private jet still felt strange, even after all these years. From project apartments to private planes, her life's journey had been extraordinary by any measure. Yet some things never changed: the sting of prejudice, the importance of dignity, and the fierce, protective love she felt for her children and grandchildren. Dolores opened her eyes as the plane leveled off above the clouds. Ahead lay Florida sunshine, family celebrations, and the challenge of keeping her hurt hidden from the ones she loved most, especially from Michael, who could always read her too well. The Jordan family estate in Jupiter, Florida, was a sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean, with palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze. As Dolores's car pulled through the security gates, she couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. The little boy who once played with a milk crate basketball hoop now lived in a palace. Michael himself was waiting at the front door, tall and imposing even in casual clothes, a simple polo shirt and khaki shorts. His smile, though, was the same one she remembered from when he was just 5 years old, bringing home a perfect spelling test. "Mom!" he called, descending the marble steps to help her from the car. He wrapped her in a hug that lifted her off her feet, just as he had done since his first growth spurt at 14. "Put me down!" she laughed, though she secretly loved these displays of affection. "I'm too old for such foolishness." "Never too old," Michael replied, but he set her gently on her feet. "Happy birthday, Mom." Inside, the house was already filled with family. Jeffrey and Roslyn had arrived from Washington. Larry and Brenda were there with their teenagers. Dolores's daughters, Dolores and Sharon, were arranging flowers in the great room. Grandchildren of various ages ran through the halls, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. "Grandma's here!" someone shouted, and suddenly Dolores was surrounded by hugging children and grandchildren. "Let her breathe," Michael laughed, shooing them back. "Mom, why don't you rest before dinner? I've set up the blue guest suite for you, the one with the ocean view you like." Dolores nodded gratefully. The journey, despite the comfort of the private jet, had tired her more than she cared to admit. In her room, she unpacked slowly, placing the small box with Jasmine's pearl necklace on the dresser. She would give it to her granddaughter after dinner. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Jasmine herself, beautiful in a summer dress, her hair styled in soft waves around her face. "Grandma," she said, hugging Dolores tightly. "I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart," Dolores replied, holding her close. Of all the grandchildren, Jasmine reminded her most of Michael. Not just in her confident stride or her competitive spirit, but in the gentle heart she kept hidden beneath a tough exterior. "Dad went all out for your birthday," Jasmine said, perching on the edge of the bed. "Wait till you see the cake. And the guests, I think he invited half of Miami." Dolores sighed. "I told him a simple family dinner would be enough." "You know, Dad," Jasmine grinned. "Nothing is ever simple with him." They chatted about Jasmine's upcoming graduation from the University of North Carolina, Michael's alma mater, and her plans to join the family's charitable foundation afterward. As they talked, Dolores found herself studying her granddaughter's wrist, bare of any watch. Perhaps the pearls would be welcome after all. At 7 o'clock, dressed in a new dress that her daughters had insisted on buying her, Dolores made her way downstairs. The great room had been transformed with flowers and candles, and a long table was set for 20 people. Michael escorted her to the head of the table, where a small pile of wrapped gifts waited beside her place setting. Despite her protests that no presents were necessary, each family member had brought something. There were books from Jeffrey, gardening tools from Larry, a handmade quilt from Sharon, and drawings from the youngest grandchildren. The meal was a feast of all her favorite foods. Fried chicken prepared just the way she liked it, collard, greens, sweet potato casserole, and cornbread. Michael had hired a chef who had clearly been instructed to follow Dolores's own recipes down to the last pinch of salt. As they ate, stories flowed around the table. Memories of childhood pranks, family vacations, and holiday disasters. Michael, always at the center, embellished each tale until everyone was laughing. In these moments, Dolores could almost forget the Chicago incident. Almost. "Oh, Grandma," Jasmine said suddenly, setting down her fork. "I've been meaning to ask you. Dad mentioned you were shopping in Chicago last month. Did you happen to check out that watch I showed you? The one from Platinum Elite?" The name hit Dolores like a physical blow. She nearly dropped her water glass, but managed to steady her hand at the last moment. I didn't get a chance to look at it," she said, avoiding Michael's eyes. "No worries," Jasmine continued, oblivious to her grandmother's discomfort. "I'm planning to go there next week when I visit Chicago for my friend's engagement party. That watch would be perfect for graduation." "It's very expensive," Dolores murmured. "I've been saving from my internship," Jasmine replied proudly, "and Dad said he'd match whatever I save." Michael, who had been deep in conversation with Jeffrey, turned at the mention of his name. "What's that about matching funds?" "For my graduation watch," Jasmine explained. From Platinum Elite in Chicago, the one with the mother-of-pearl face. Michael nodded, but his eyes were on Dolores, who was staring intently at her plate. "Right," he said slowly. "Mom, didn't you visit that store when you were in Chicago?" Dolores felt the weight of her son's gaze. Michael had always been able to read her too well, a sixth sense for her moods that had developed during their hardest years. "I just walked past it," she said, forcing a smile. "It looked very nice." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press further. Instead, he changed the subject smoothly to Jasmine's upcoming finals. Dolores released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. When the cake appeared, a towering creation with 70 candles that took 3 people to carry, Dolores obediently closed her eyes and made a wish before blowing them out. "I wish for my family's happiness and health," she thought, the same wish she had made for decades. After cake came dancing. Michael had hired a small jazz band that played songs from her youth. One by one, her sons took turns dancing with her. First Michael, then Jeffrey, then Larry, each one commenting on how she had taught them to dance in their tiny living room in Wilmington, using the radio for music. As the evening wore on, the younger children grew tired and were taken upstairs by their parents. The adults moved to the terrace overlooking the ocean, where coffee and dessert liqueurs were served. Dolores found herself sitting slightly apart from the others, watching the moonlight on the water. Despite the joyful celebration, a sadness lingered in her heart, not just from the Chicago incident, but from the knowledge that she was keeping secrets from her children for the first time in her life. She didn't notice Michael approaching until he sat beside her on the cushioned bench. "Beautiful night," he said, his voice low. "Yes," she agreed. "Thank you for all this, Michael. It was lovely." "Nothing's too good for you, Mom," he replied, covering her hand with his much larger one. "You know that." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the waves. Then Michael said casually, "So, you want to tell me what's really bothering you?" Dolores stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Mom," Michael said gently, "I've known you my whole life. You've been quiet all evening. Even when you're smiling, your eyes look sad. Did something happen in Chicago that you're not telling me?" "It's nothing," Dolores insisted. "Just getting old, I suppose. Birthdays make you think about time passing." Michael studied her face in the dim light. "It's more than that," he said finally. "It has something to do with that store Jasmine mentioned. Doesn't it? Platinum Elite." Dolores felt a flicker of panic. How did he always know? "Michael, please, it's my birthday. Let's not talk about unpleasant things." "So there is something unpleasant," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "What happened at that store, Mom?" Dolores sighed, recognizing the tone. It was the same determination she had heard when he was 12, and insisted he would make the varsity team despite his coach's doubts. The same resolve he had shown when he declared he would support the family after James died. When Michael Jordan set his mind to discovering something, very little could stop him. "It was nothing, really," she said, trying one last time to deflect. "Just a misunderstanding." "Mom." His voice was quiet, but firm. "Tell me." Looking into her son's eyes, so like his father's, Dolores realized she couldn't keep this from him any longer. Perhaps, she thought, sharing the burden would lighten it. "All right," she said softly, so the others couldn't hear. "But you have to promise me something first." Michael nodded solemnly. "Anything." "Promise me you won't do anything rash," Dolores said, knowing her son's protective instincts all too well. Promise me you'll listen to the whole story before you decide how to respond." "I promise," Michael said, though she could see the tension already building in his shoulders. Taking a deep breath, Dolores began to tell him about her visit to Platinum Elite, about the dismissive looks and the manager's condescending words. As she spoke, she watched Michael's expression change from concern to disbelief to a controlled anger she recognized all too well. By the time she finished, the moonlight revealed a hardness in his eyes that reminded her of game nights when opposing teams had made the mistake of taunting him. "Why didn't you tell them who you were?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "That's not who we are," Dolores replied simply. "Your father and I raised you to stand on your own character, not on your name or your fame. I wasn't going to use your accomplishments to demand respect I should have been given anyway." Michael was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed her words. "I'm going to make this right," he said finally. "Michael," she began. "I promised I wouldn't do anything rash," he interrupted. "And I won't. But I am going to do something, Mom. No one treats my mother that way. No one." Dolores sighed, recognizing the determination in her son's voice. It was the same tone he'd used throughout his career, when facing opponents who'd underestimated him, when pushing through injuries, when proving doubters wrong. "Michael, there's no need to make a fuss," she said softly. "I've lived through worse than a rude salesman." "That's exactly the point, Mom," Michael replied, his voice low but intense. "You shouldn't have to live through any of it. Not anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the ocean waves and distant family, laughter filling the night air. Dolores studied her son's profile, the determined set of his jaw so like his father's, the intensity in his eyes that had made opponents back down on basketball courts across the world. "You always protected us," Michael continued finally. "When Dad was working late shifts at GE, when those kids down the street threw rocks at our windows, when reporters camped outside our house after my first championship, you protected all of us, all the time." Dolores smiled at the memories. "That's what mothers do. And that's what sons do too," Michael countered. "Protect their mothers." A gentle breeze stirred the palm fronds overhead, carrying the scent of jasmine and sea salt. In the distance, Dolores could hear her grandchildren laughing as they played a late-night game of hide-and-seek in the mansion's many rooms. "What happened at that store was wrong," Michael continued, his voice controlled but edged with anger. "And it happens too often to too many people. But it shouldn't happen to anyone, especially not to you." "The world isn't perfect, Michael," Dolores said gently. "You know that better than most. There will always be people who judge others by what they see on the outside. You can't fix everything." "Maybe not everything," Michael conceded. "But I can fix this." Before Dolores could respond, they were interrupted by Jasmine, who bounded onto the terrace with the energy only a 21-year-old could possess after a long evening. "There you are," she exclaimed. "Dad, Uncle Jeffrey is looking for you. Something about a bet on the golf game tomorrow?" Michael nodded but didn't move immediately. "Tell him I'll be there in a minute, sweetheart." As Jasmine turned to leave, Dolores called after her. "Jasmine, wait, I have something for you." "For me? But it's your birthday, Grandma." "Sometimes giving gifts brings more joy than receiving them," Dolores replied, rising from her seat. "Come with me to my room." Upstairs, Dolores retrieved the small box containing the pearl necklace. She opened it and held it out to her granddaughter. "These belong to your grandfather," she explained. "He gave them to me on our 5th anniversary, long before your father became famous. We were still struggling then, and he saved for months to buy them." Jasmine's eyes widened as she took the delicate strand. "They're beautiful, Grandma. I want you to have them for your graduation," Dolores said. "Instead of that watch." Jasmine looked up, surprised. "But I thought you liked the watch idea. What made you change your mind?" Dolores hesitated, not wanting to share the real reason. "These pearls have history," she said finally. "They carry your grandfather's love and now mine. No brand-new watch can offer that." Jasmine nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, fastening the necklace around her throat. "I'll treasure them always." When they returned downstairs, the party was winding down. Family members were saying their goodnights, heading to their assigned rooms in the sprawling mansion. Dolores looked for Michael but was told by Sharon that he had gone to his study to make a phone call. "At this hour?" Dolores asked, checking her watch. "It was nearly midnight." Sharon shrugged. "You know, Michael, business never sleeps." Dolores frowned, a suspicion forming in her mind. But she was too tired to investigate further tonight. Tomorrow would be soon enough to make sure Michael wasn't planning anything drastic about the Chicago incident. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the Florida sun streaming through the windows of her ocean view suite. Dolores woke early, as she had done every day of her adult life. Old habits formed during years of raising 5 children while working. Multiple jobs were hard to break, even in the luxury of her son's mansion. She found Michael in the kitchen, already dressed in golf clothes, drinking coffee as he scrolled through his phone. He looked up when she entered, a smile erasing the serious expression she had glimpsed. "Morning, Mom. Sleep well?" "Like a log," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the carafe on the counter. "This bed is almost too comfortable. I sink right into it," Michael laughed. "Only you would complain about a bed being too comfortable." They chatted about the plans for the day. A family brunch, then a golf outing for the men while the women had scheduled a spa day. Through it all, Dolores watched her son carefully. Something was different about him this morning. A subtle tension in his shoulders, an occasional distant look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. When Jeffrey entered the kitchen, greeting them both with a cheerful, "Good morning," before heading straight for the coffee, Dolores decided to seize her opportunity. "Michael, about our conversation last night." "Don't worry, Mom," he interrupted smoothly. "I haven't forgotten my promise. Nothing rash." "What promise?" Jeffrey asked, looking between them curiously. "Nothing important," Michael replied, giving his brother a look that clearly said, "Drop it. Just some birthday business." Jeffrey raised his eyebrows but didn't press further. Years of being Michael Jordan's brother had taught him when to back off. The day proceeded as planned, with brunch served on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Dolores found herself surrounded by family, opening more birthday gifts, laughing at her grandchildren's antics, and trying to silence the worry niggling at the back of her mind. As the men prepared to leave for golf, Dolores pulled Michael aside. "I saw Jasmine wearing the pearls," he said, before she could speak. "Beautiful choice. Much more meaningful than a watch." "Michael," Dolores said firmly, keeping her voice low, "I need you to promise me again that you won't do anything about that store. Let it go. For me." Michael looked down at her, his expression softening. "Mom, I promise I won't do anything that would embarrass you or go against the values you and Dad taught us." It wasn't exactly the promise she had asked for, but Dolores knew it was the best she would get. Michael had always had his own way of handling things, methodical, strategic, and ultimately effective. It was what had made him not just a great athlete, but a successful businessman. "All right," she said, patting his arm. "Go enjoy your golf. Try not to let your brothers win too easily." Michael laughed. Never. You taught us to play to win, remember? As he walked away to join his brothers, Dolores couldn't shake the feeling that something had already been set in motion. Michael had that look, the one she had seen before championship games, before major business deals, before any challenge he had decided to conquer. The women's spa day was a luxurious affair, with massages, facials, and manicures provided by a team brought, especially for the occasion. Throughout it all, Dolores tried to relax and enjoy the pampering, but her mind kept returning to the conversation with Michael. What was he planning? And more importantly, would it make things better or worse? That evening, as the family gathered for a final dinner before most would depart the next day, Dolores watched Michael carefully. He seemed relaxed, joking with his brothers, teasing his nieces and nephews, treating the gathering like any other family dinner. But twice she caught him in quiet conversation with Scottie Pippen, who had arrived that afternoon to join them for dinner. The two men had been teammates for years, winning 6 championships together with the Chicago Bulls. Their friendship had endured beyond their playing days, and they now shared business interests as well. After dinner, as everyone moved to the etude, great room for coffee and dessert, Dolores approached them where they stood near the windows, deep in conversation that stopped abruptly when she drew near. "Scottie," she said warmly, embracing her son's friend. "So good to see you. How's the family?" "All good, Mrs. Jordan," he replied with the respectful tone he had always used with her, even after becoming a star in his own right. "The kids are growing too fast, as usual." "They tend to do that," she agreed. Then, looking between the two men, she added, "What were you two planning when I walked up? You both look like you're up to something." Michael and Scottie exchanged glances. "Just business, Mom," Michael said smoothly. "Boring stuff about our new investment downtown." Dolores raised an eyebrow, not believing him for a second. "Michael James Jordan, I've known you since before you could talk. Don't try to fool your mother." Scottie chuckled. "She's got you there, MJ." Michael sighed, then pulled her gently aside, away from the rest of the family. "Look, Mom, I told you I wasn't going to do anything rash, and I'm not, but I am going to address what happened at that store." "Michael," she began. "No, Mom, listen," he interrupted quietly. "What happened to you isn't right. It isn't right when it happens to anyone. I have the ability to do something about it, so I'm going to." "By doing what?" Dolores asked, suspicious. "I'm going back to Chicago next week," he said simply. "I'd like you to come with me." "To do what?" she pressed. "To revisit Platinum Elite," Michael replied, his voice firm. Together, Dolores felt a flash of panic. "No, absolutely not. I'm not going back there to be humiliated again." "You won't be," Michael promised. "Trust me, Mom. I've thought this through. No public confrontation, no embarrassment. Just you and me, handling this the right way." "The right way according to whom?" Dolores challenged. Michael's expression softened. "The right way according to you and Dad. The way you taught us to handle problems, with dignity, with purpose, and with an eye toward making things better, not just making a point." Dolores studied her son's face, searching for signs of the impulsive anger she had feared. Instead, she saw calm determination and a thoughtfulness that reminded her, with a pang, of James. "Tell me exactly what you're planning," she said finally. "Not yet," Michael replied. "I'm still working out some details with Scottie, but I promise you this. It will be something that honors the values you and Dad instilled in us. Something that makes a difference, not just a statement." For a long moment, Dolores considered her options. She could refuse to go, but she knew her son well enough to know he would proceed without her. At least if she went along, she might have some influence over whatever he was planning. "All right," she said at last. "I'll go with you, but on one condition." "Name it," Michael said. "If at any point I think what you're doing isn't right, isn't what your father would approve of, you'll stop. Immediately." Michael nodded solemnly. "Deal." As they rejoined the family gathering, Dolores felt a curious mixture of apprehension and relief. Whatever Michael was planning, at least she would be there to guide him, just as she had done since he was small. And perhaps, she thought, as she watched him laughing with his siblings, this might be a chance to turn an ugly incident into something positive. After all, wasn't that what she and James had always taught their children? Not to run from problems, but to face them head-on and try to make things better. Still, as the evening wore on, she couldn't help wondering exactly what her son had in mind for Platinum Elite, and whether it would bring the healing she needed or only reopen the wound she had tried so hard to forget. The morning after the family celebration, most of the Jordan clan departed. Jeffrey back to Washington, Sharon to her home in Pennsylvania, Larry and his family to North Carolina. By early afternoon, only Michael, Jasmine, and Dolores remained at the sprawling Florida estate, along with Scottie Pippen, who had extended his stay at Michael's request. Michael's private jet was scheduled to take Dolores back to Wilmington the following day, giving her one more night in Florida. She spent the morning walking along the private beach, gathering shells and watching pelicans dive into the turquoise water, while Michael and Scottie closeted themselves in Michael's home office. When she returned to the house around noon, Jasmine was waiting for her on the terrace with a glass of iced tea. "Dad and Uncle Scottie have been in there for hours," Jasmine said, nodding toward the closed office door. "Something about Chicago." Dolores felt a flicker of unease. "Did they say what?" "Not really," Jasmine replied, playing with the pearl necklace at her throat. "Just that they're planning a trip next week. Dad asked if I wanted to go with you guys, but I have finals." Dolores nodded, relieved that at least Jasmine wouldn't be involved in whatever Michael was planning. The last thing she wanted was for her granddaughter to witness her humiliation, even secondhand. "Probably just some business with the team," Dolores said casually, sipping her tea. But she knew better. Michael rarely spent hours planning routine business matters, and he certainly didn't involve Scottie in team decisions these days. Later that afternoon, as Dolores was packing for her return trip, there was a knock at her door. It was Michael, looking simultaneously serious and energized, an expression she recognized from his playing days before important games. "Got a minute, Mom?" he asked, stepping into the room when she nodded. "We should talk about next week." Dolores sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for him to take the chair by the window. "I'm listening." "We're flying to Chicago on Tuesday," Michael began. "I've booked us rooms at the Peninsula, the same place you stayed last time. On Wednesday morning, we're going to visit Platinum Elite." "To do what, exactly?" Dolores asked, her apprehension growing. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "To have a conversation," he said simply, "with the manager who treated you poorly, and with the owner of the store." "And if I don't want to have that conversation?" Dolores challenged. "Then I'll respect that," Michael replied evenly. "But I think it would be powerful, for them and for you. Not a confrontation, Mom. An education." Dolores sighed, studying her son's face. The determination she saw there was tempered with something else, a thoughtfulness that reassured her. "Have you already contacted the store?" she asked. Michael nodded. "Scottie made a call this morning. He didn't mention you or what happened. Just said that I'm interested in visiting the store next week to discuss a potential business opportunity." "What business opportunity?" Dolores asked suspiciously. A small smile tugged at the corner of Michael's mouth. That's for them to wonder about until we get there. Trust me, Mom. No store owner in Chicago is going to turn down a meeting with Michael Jordan. That evening, Dolores joined Michael and Scotty for dinner at Michael's Steakhouse in Jupiter, a short drive from the estate. The restaurant, like everything associated with her son, was impeccably designed, elegant without being stuffy, luxurious without ostentation. As they settled into a private dining room, staff members greeted Michael with the perfect balance of respect and familiarity. Dolores watched with pride as her son spoke to each person by name, asking about families and remembering details from previous conversations. Once they were alone with their appetizers, Scotty turned to Dolores with a gentle smile. "Michael told me what happened at that store in Chicago," he said. "I'm sorry you had to experience that, Mrs. Jordan. No one should be treated that way, especially not you." Dolores nodded her thanks, touched by his concern. "I appreciate that, Scotty. But it's hardly the first time I've dealt with prejudice, and I doubt it will be the last." "That's exactly the problem," Michael interjected, his voice low but intense. "It shouldn't happen at all, but it definitely shouldn't happen to someone who's been a customer at high-end stores for decades now. If they're still doing this to my mother in 2024, what are they doing to other black women who walk through those doors?" Scotty nodded agreement. "That's why we think this plan makes sense. It's not just about making things right for Mrs. Jordan, though that's important. It's about possibly changing how they operate going forward." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Dolores asked, still skeptical. Michael exchanged a glance with Scotty before answering. "We go in together, you and me. I'm guessing the manager won't recognize you immediately, especially if you wear the same outfit you wore last time." "Why would I do that?" Dolores asked, surprised. "Because we want him to treat you the same way he did before," Michael explained. "At least initially. I'll hang back, watching. Then, when he starts with the condescending attitude, I'll approach." "And make a scene?" Dolores frowned. "No," Michael said firmly. "No scene, just a conversation. I'll introduce myself, make it clear that you're my mother, and ask to speak with the store owner, who will then fire the manager on the spot, I suppose," Dolores said dryly. "That's not our call," Scotty intervened. "Though it might be what the guy deserves. The point is to have a real conversation about what happened and why it's unacceptable." "And if that doesn't work," Dolores pressed, "if the owner makes excuses or doesn't see the problem?" Michael's expression hardened slightly. "Then we have other options. I have some leverage in Chicago retail circles, but I'm hoping it doesn't come to that." Dolores studied her son's face, remembering all the times she had seen that same determined look over the years, when he didn't make varsity as a sophomore and trained harder than anyone had ever seen. When commentators said he couldn't win without Scotty during their first breakup. When doctors said he couldn't come back from injuries that would have ended other careers. Michael Jordan had never been someone who accepted limitations or settled for less than what he believed was right. "What's the best outcome you're hoping for?" she asked finally. "Honestly," Michael replied, "I want them to understand what they did wrong and make real changes. Not just apologize to you, but commit to training their staff better, treating all customers with respect regardless of how they're dressed or what they look like. And if they do that," Scotty added, "Michael has some ideas for how to support their efforts. Maybe partner on something positive rather than just calling them out publicly." "That's why we need you there, Mom," Michael continued. "Not just to show them who they mistreated, but because you've always been better than me at turning negative experiences into teaching moments. Remember how you handled it when that reporter wrote that article calling me selfish after my first championship? Dolores smiled faintly at the memory. The reporter had written a scathing critique, suggesting that Michael cared more about individual stats than team success. She had invited the man to Sunday dinner at their home, where he had seen firsthand the values she had instilled in her. Son, that was different, she said. He was willing to listen. And these people might be too, Michael countered. If they're not, we walk away. But don't you think it's worth trying for the next woman who walks into that store and gets judged by her appearance rather than her character? The words struck home. Dolores had spent her life standing up not just for herself, but for others, her children, her community, the young mothers she mentored through her church. Perhaps this was another opportunity to make a difference, albeit in a setting she hadn't chosen. I'll think about it, she said finally. No promises yet. Michael nodded, accepting her answer for now. The rest of the dinner passed pleasantly, with Scotty sharing stories about his children and Michael discussing Jasmine's post-graduation plans. By the time they returned to the estate, the tension had eased, though Dolores's mind was still turning over the possibilities. That night, she lay awake in the luxurious guest suite, weighing her options. She could refuse to go to Chicago, letting Michael handle the situation on his own. That would be the easiest path, avoiding the potential for further humiliation or confrontation. But easy had never been her way. From raising 5 children while working multiple jobs to supporting Michael through the media scrutiny and pressure of his career, to rebuilding her life after James's tragic death, Dolores Jordan had never chosen the path of least resistance. And perhaps, she thought, as she finally drifted toward sleep, there was wisdom in Michael's approach. Not confrontation for its own sake, but a chance to transform an ugly incident into something constructive. The way she had always taught her children to handle adversity. The next morning, as she prepared to board Michael's private jet for her return to Wilmington, Dolores made her decision. I'll go with you to Chicago, she told Michael as they stood on the tarmac. But we do this my way. No anger, no threats. Just honest conversation about why what happened was wrong and how it can be fixed. Michael grinned, the same boyish smile that had lit up her heart since he was a toddler. Your way is always better than mine anyway, Mom, he said, hugging her tightly. That's why I need you there. As the jet lifted off, carrying her back to the quiet comfort of her Wilmington home, Dolores felt a curious mixture of apprehension and anticipation. Whatever happened at Platinum Elite next week would not erase the sting of her previous visit, but perhaps it could transform it into something meaningful, not just for her, but for others who might walk through those doors in the future. And in the end, wasn't that what James would have wanted? Not revenge or public humiliation, but progress. The quiet, persistent work of making the world a little better, one interaction at a time. Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear in Chicago, with a brisk wind blowing off Lake Michigan. Dolores stood at the window of her suite at the Peninsula Hotel, watching the early morning bustle on Michigan Avenue below. The same luxury shops that had lined the street during her last visit gleamed in the spring sunshine, their windows displaying the latest fashions and accessories. In just 2 hours, she would return to Platinum Elite, not as an anonymous shopper, but as Michael Jordan's mother. The thought sent a flutter of nervous energy through her stomach. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Michael entered, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Ready for breakfast, Mom?" he asked, studying her face. Nearly, she replied, turning from the window. Just need to finish getting dressed. Michael glanced at the outfit laid out on her bed. The same navy dress and sensible shoes she had worn during her previous visit to the boutique. His jaw tightened slightly, but he simply nodded. "I'll wait for you in the dining room," he said. "Take your time." Over breakfast in the hotel's elegant restaurant, they reviewed their plan one final time. Michael would enter the store first, hanging back near the door while Dolores approached the counter. When the same sales manager appeared, they would see if he recognized her or repeated his dismissive behavior. Only then would Michael step forward. "Remember," Dolores said firmly, buttering a piece of toast, "no anger, no public confrontation." "I remember," Michael assured her, though his expression remained serious. "This isn't about embarrassing them, Mom. It's about education." At precisely 10 o'clock, their car pulled up outside Platinum Elite. The store had just opened for the day, and through the gleaming windows, Dolores could see only a few employees moving about, arranging displays and preparing for the day's customers. "Ready?" Michael asked, as the driver held the door open. Dolores took a deep breath and nodded. "As I'll ever be." As planned, Michael entered first, positioning himself near a display of men's watches, his tall figure partially concealed by a decorative pillar. Despite being one of the most recognizable people in America, he had a way of blending into backgrounds when he chose to, a skill developed during years of trying to maintain some privacy in a very public life. Dolores entered seconds later, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. The store looked exactly as it had during her previous visit. The same crystal chandeliers, the same plush carpet, the same soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. She moved directly to the counter where watches were displayed, focusing on the very piece she had asked to see weeks earlier, a sleek silver timepiece with a mother-of-pearl face. As if on cue, the same young female associate who had initially ignored her appeared, giving Dolores the same quick, dismissive glance. "May I help you?" the woman asked, her tone suggesting she doubted she could. "Yes," Dolores replied calmly. "I'd like to see that watch, please." She pointed to the same piece she had inquired about before. Once again, the associate glanced across the room, making eye contact with someone out of Dolores's line of sight. "Just a moment," she said, disappearing into a back room. From his position near the pillar, Michael watched the interaction, his posture tense but controlled. Dolores could feel his eyes on her, providing silent support. Moments later, Bradley. Williams emerged from the back room, adjusting his tie as he approached the counter. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his manner brisk and professional, until he saw who waited at the counter. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Quickly replaced by the same condescending smile Dolores remembered all too well. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "How may I assist you today?" "I'm interested in that watch," Dolores repeated, pointing to the same timepiece. Bradley's expression didn't change, but his tone became slightly patronizing. "Ah, yes, from our Celestial collection, as I believe I mentioned during your last visit. These pieces start at $25,000. "Yes, you did mention that," Dolores agreed, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath her calm exterior. "And as I mentioned then, I'm aware of the price." Bradley's smile tightened. "Of course. However, I wonder if you might be interested in something more suitable? We have some lovely pieces in our Essentials collection that offer excellent quality at a more accessible price point." It was happening again. The same dismissive treatment, the same assumptions based solely on her appearance. Dolores felt a flash of the same hurt and anger she had experienced during her first visit, but this time it was tempered by the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Before she could respond, a voice spoke from just behind her. Deep, authoritative, and unmistakable to anyone who had lived in Chicago during the 1990s. "Is there a problem here?" Bradley looked up, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. Then his expression froze as he recognized the man who now stood beside Dolores, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Mr. Jordan," he stammered, his confident demeanor crumbling instantly. "It's an honor to have you in our store, sir." Michael didn't smile. "I'm not sure I feel welcomed, considering how you're treating my mother." The color drained from Bradley's face as his gaze darted between Michael and Dolores, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Your mother?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Michael confirmed, his tone controlled but edged with steel. "Dolores Jordan. The woman you suggested might be more comfortable shopping elsewhere when she visited your store 3 weeks ago." Around them, the few other customers in the store had fallen silent, watching the scene unfold. 2 other sales associates stood frozen behind their counters, eyes wide with recognition and alarm. Bradley's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. I had no idea. Please accept my most sincere apologies, Mrs. Jordan. I didn't recognize." "That's exactly the problem," Michael interrupted, his voice low but carrying in the hushed store. "You shouldn't treat anyone the way you treated my mother, regardless of who they are or who they're related to." Bradley swallowed hard, his professional composure completely shattered. "Of course. You're absolutely right, Mr. Jordan. It was inexcusable." "I'd like to speak with the owner of this establishment," Michael continued, his expression unyielding. "Is he or she available?" "The owner?" Bradley repeated, looking increasingly alarmed. "Ms. Pierce is in her office. I can check if she's available for a meeting." "Please do," Michael replied. "Tell her Michael Jordan would like to discuss some concerning business practices at her store." As Bradley hurried toward the back of the store, Dolores placed a hand on her son's arm. "Remember what we agreed," she said softly. "No public scene." Michael covered her hand with his own, his expression softening slightly. "No scene, Mom. Just a conversation that needs to happen." A moment later, Bradley returned, his face still pale. "Ms. Pierce would be honored to meet with you both. Please, follow me." He led them through the store to a discreet door at the rear, then up a short flight of stairs to a stylishly appointed office. A woman in her early 50s stood waiting beside an elegant desk. She was tall and slim, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun. Her tailored navy suit and minimal jewelry spoke of understated wealth and confidence. "Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Jordan," she said, stepping forward with an extended hand. "I'm Victoria Pierce, the owner of Platinum Elite. It's a tremendous honor to meet you both." Her accent held traces of Eastern Europe beneath polished American English. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing as she looked from Michael to Dolores. "Please, sit down," she continued, gesturing to a seating area by the window overlooking Michigan Avenue. "Bradley, bring us coffee, please." As Bradley retreated, closing the door behind him, Victoria took a seat across from them, her posture straight, her expression composed but concerned. "Now," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "I understand there's been some unfortunate misunderstanding with one of our staff members?" "Not a misunderstanding," Michael corrected firmly. "My mother visited your store 3 weeks ago to purchase a graduation gift for my daughter. She was treated disrespectfully by your manager, who suggested she might be more comfortable shopping elsewhere because he assumed she couldn't afford your merchandise." Victoria's expression shifted to one of genuine distress. "Mrs. Jordan, is this true?" Dolores nodded. I'm afraid it is. Mr. Williams made it very clear that he believed I didn't belong in your store. Based on what? Victoria pressed, her brow furrowing. Based on how I was dressed, Dolores replied simply. Based on how I look. An older black woman in sensible shoes instead of designer heels. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, a flash of what looked like personal pain crossing her features. When she opened them again, her gaze was direct and sincere. Mrs. Jordan, Mr. Jordan, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for this incident. This behavior goes against everything I believe, personally, and everything this business should stand for. I appreciate your apology, Michael replied, his tone still firm. But I'd like to understand how something like this happens in your establishment. What kind of training do your employees receive? What kind of culture are you fostering here? Before Victoria could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Bradley entered carrying a silver tray with coffee service, his movements stiff with apparent anxiety. He set the tray on the table between them and retreated to stand by the door, clearly uncertain whether he should stay or go. Bradley, Victoria said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Please stay. I think you should be part of this conversation. As she poured coffee for her guests, Victoria seemed to be gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was measured and thoughtful. When I opened this store 20 years ago, I had a very specific vision. I wanted to create a space where quality and craftsmanship were celebrated, where customers felt valued, not for the size of their wallets, but for their appreciation of beautiful things. She passed cups to Dolores and Michael before continuing. I should tell you a bit about myself. I came to this country from Ukraine as a refugee when I was 19 years old. I had nothing, no money, no connections, barely any English. I worked as a cleaner in a jewelry store on Jewelers Row, studying the business at night, saving every penny. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window briefly before returning to her guests. The owner of that store treated me like I was invisible. Customers looked through me as if I didn't exist. When I finally saved enough to buy a simple pair of earrings from the very store where I scrubbed floors, the saleswoman asked if I was sure I could afford them. Michael's expression softened slightly as he began to understand where her story was headed. I promised myself then that if I ever had my own store, everyone who walked through the door would be treated with dignity. Victoria continued. Everyone would be valued, regardless of what they wore or how they looked. She turned to Bradley, who stood uncomfortably by the door. That was the founding principle of Platinum Elite. Was it not, Bradley? Yes, Miss Pierce, he replied quietly. Yet somehow, she continued, her voice hardening, we have failed Mrs. Jordan not once, but twice. Please explain to me how this happened. Bradley shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on the floor. I made assumptions, he said finally. I judged Mrs. Jordan based on her appearance, not on who she was as a person. It was wrong, inexcusable. Indeed it was, Victoria agreed. And not just because she happens to be the mother of Michael Jordan, but because every single person who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with respect. She turned back to Dolores and Michael. I won't make excuses for what happened. Bradley's behavior was completely contrary to our values, and there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? Michael asked, his voice level. Victoria met his gaze directly. That depends partly on what you feel would be appropriate. Some might say he should be dismissed immediately. Bradley's head jerked up, his face paling further at this statement. Before Michael could respond, Dolores spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Firing Mr. Williams won't solve the underlying problem, she said. If the issue is one of culture and training, simply replacing him won't ensure that the next person behaves differently. Victoria looked at her with dawning respect. "What would you suggest, Mrs. Jordan?" Dolores considered for a moment, studying Bradley's tense posture and fearful expression. In him, she saw not just an arrogant salesman, but a symptom of a wider problem, one that firing a single employee wouldn't fix. "I believe in second chances," she said finally, "and in learning from mistakes. Perhaps Mr. Williams could be part of creating a solution rather than simply paying the price for the problem." Michael glanced at his mother, pride evident in his expression despite his lingering anger. Even now, faced with the man who had humiliated her, she was thinking of the bigger picture, of how to turn this incident into something constructive rather than merely punitive. Victoria nodded slowly. "That's a generous perspective, Mrs. Jordan. What kind of solution did you have in mind?" As the morning light streamed through the office windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between them, the conversation turned from confrontation to collaboration. The hurt and anger that had brought them to this place began to transform into something more positive, the beginning of genuine change rather than simply the end of an unfortunate incident. And in that transformation, Dolores recognized the hand of James, whose spirit had always guided their family toward healing rather than harboring grudges, toward progress rather than retribution. In her heart, she knew he would be proud of the path they were choosing today. Victoria leaned forward in her chair, her expression thoughtful as she considered Dolores's words. "You're suggesting an approach focused on growth rather than punishment," she said. "That's refreshing in today's cancel culture." Bradley remained standing by the door, his posture stiff, but his expression shifting from fear to cautious hope. "I've always believed that most people deserve a chance to learn from their mistakes," Dolores replied. "My late husband James used to say that true character isn't about never failing. It's about what you do after you fail." Michael nodded, his initial anger visibly softening as he listened to his mother's wisdom. "Mom has always been the compass in our family," he said to Victoria. "When I wanted to quit basketball after not making varsity sophomore year, she wouldn't let me walk away. She made me face the disappointment and work harder." Victoria studied them both for a moment before turning to Bradley. "You understand what Mrs. Jordan is offering you? A chance to make amends rather than simply face consequences." "I do," Bradley replied, his voice subdued. "And I'm more grateful than I can express." "Don't be grateful yet," Michael said, his tone still carrying an edge. "Making real change is harder than simply losing a job and moving on. My mother is giving you an opportunity, but what you do with it is up to you." Victoria gestured for Bradley to join them in the seating area. Reluctantly, he perched on the edge of a chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Mrs. Jordan, Mr. Jordan," Victoria began, "I want you to know that what happened here reflects a failure of leadership on my part. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of those founding principles I mentioned. As we became more successful, as our clientele became more exclusive, I allowed the culture of this store to shift without even realizing it." "How so?" Dolores asked gently. Victoria sighed, looking momentarily older than her years. "When I started this business, I knew what it felt like to be judged by appearances. But success can insulate you from those experiences. Our average sale now is over $15,000. Our typical customer has multiple homes and travels internationally. Without intending to, I began to measure value in terms of purchasing power. And that attitude filtered down to your staff," Michael observed. "Yes," Victoria admitted. I didn't explicitly train them to judge customers by their appearance, but I didn't actively train them not to, either. I assumed we would all remember what it feels like to be dismissed or overlooked. But assumptions aren't enough. She turned to Bradley. How long have you worked here? 7 years, he replied. I started as a sales associate and worked my way up to manager. And in that time, Victoria continued, did you ever receive specific training about not judging customers by their appearance? Bradley hesitated, then shook his head. No. We had sales training, product knowledge, security protocols, but nothing specifically about treating all customers equally regardless of how they're dressed. That's my failure, Victoria said firmly, looking back to Dolores and Michael. And one I intend to correct. How? Michael asked, his businessman's mind clearly calculating possibilities and pitfalls. Victoria thought for a moment. We need a comprehensive training program focused on inclusivity and respect. Not just a one-day workshop that everyone forgets, but an ongoing commitment to treating every person who walks through our doors with dignity. That's a start, Dolores agreed. But training alone isn't enough if the underlying culture doesn't support it. Victoria nodded. You're absolutely right. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, as they say. We need to examine everything. Our hiring practices, our incentive structures, even how we measure success. As the conversation continued, Bradley gradually began to participate, moving from defensive responses to thoughtful engagement. He admitted that sales associates received bonuses based on total sales volumes, creating an incentive to focus on customers who appeared wealthy and ignore those who didn't. We never talk about it explicitly, he explained, but there's an unspoken understanding that your time is best spent with people who look like they can afford high-end items. And how do you determine that? Dolores asked pointedly. Bradley looked uncomfortable. Designer clothes, expensive shoes, luxury handbags, certain watches or jewelry, things that many wealthy people don't actually wear when they're shopping casually, Michael noted. I know billionaires who wear sweatpants to buy art. Victoria's expression had grown increasingly troubled as she listened. This goes deeper than I realized, she admitted. It's not just Bradley's behavior, it's systematic. Which means the solution needs to be systematic too, Dolores said. For the next hour, the four of them discussed possibilities. Victoria proposed revamping the entire training program, with an emphasis on treating every customer with equal respect, regardless of appearance. Michael suggested changing the incentive structure to reward customer satisfaction rather than just sales volumes. And Dolores, drawing on her decades of community work, proposed something more radical. Your sales associates need to understand what it feels like to be judged by appearances, she said. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. How would we accomplish that? Victoria asked. By getting them out of this environment, Dolores replied, gesturing to the luxurious office. Have them volunteer in communities where they might be the ones who look different, who don't automatically fit in. Let them experience what it's like to be on the other side. Bradley looked startled at this suggestion. You mean like community service? I mean like community engagement, Dolores corrected gently. Not as punishment, but as education. I volunteer at a community center on the South Side. The seniors there could teach you more about dignity in an afternoon than any corporate training program could in a week. Victoria's eyes lit up with understanding. And it would connect us to the broader community in a meaningful way, not just as wealthy people doing charity work, but as human beings learning from each other. Exactly, Dolores said, smiling at how quickly Victoria had grasped the concept. Michael, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. This is all good, But there's another dimension we should consider. Mom, you were looking for a graduation gift for Jasmine when this happened. How many other people have left this store, feeling the way you did, but didn't have someone like me to help address the situation? Victoria looked troubled by this question. I wish I knew. There's no way to measure opportunities lost because someone felt unwelcome. Actually, Bradley said hesitantly, there might be. Our security system records all interactions on the sales floor. We could review footage, look for patterns of behavior with different types of customers. That would be a start, Michael. Agreed. But it doesn't address the core issue of helping people who have already been harmed. Victoria was silent for a moment, clearly deep in thought. Then she straightened in her chair, her expression resolute. What if we created a scholarship program? She suggested. For underprivileged youth interested in careers in retail or design, we could provide not just financial support, but mentorship, internships, a real pathway into an industry that has traditionally been exclusionary. Michael's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. That could work. My foundation has experience setting up scholarship programs. We could partner on something like that. And Bradley could lead the initiative, Dolores suggested, earning surprised looks from everyone in the room, including Bradley himself. Me? He asked incredulously. Yes, you, Dolores replied firmly. You understand what not to do because you've done it. That gives you unique insight, as long as you're willing to learn and grow from this experience. Bradley looked stunned by the suggestion. I don't know what to say. Say you'll do better, Dolores told him simply. Not just with wealthy customers or famous ones, but with every person who walks through that door downstairs. Say you understand now that dignity isn't something that needs to be earned through wealth or status. It's the birthright of every human being. For the first time since they had entered the office, Bradley's expression completely transformed. The fear and defensiveness melted away, replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse and understanding. I will, he said quietly. I promise you that, Mrs. Jordan. And I truly am sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse for it. Victoria turned to Michael and Dolores, her expression both solemn and hopeful. I want to thank you both, not just for bringing this issue to my attention, but for approaching it with such grace and wisdom. You had every right to be angry, to demand firing, even to go public with what happened. Instead, you've offered us a path forward that could genuinely make things better, not just here, but perhaps in the wider industry. Michael glanced at his mother, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The wisdom part is all, Mom. The grace, too. I was ready to buy this place just to fire everyone. Dolores placed a hand on her son's arm. No, you weren't. You've always had a bigger heart than that, Michael. You just needed a reminder. As they prepared to leave, having sketched out the beginnings of a plan for transformation, Victoria walked them to the door of her office. Mrs. Jordan, she said, her voice quiet but sincere, would you consider coming back occasionally to help us implement these changes? Your perspective would be invaluable. Dolores considered the request. Her initial instinct was to decline, to put the whole unpleasant experience behind her. But then she thought of the young women who might walk into this store in the future. Women who, unlike her, didn't have a famous son to ensure they were treated with respect. I'd be willing to consult, she said finally. Not regularly, but perhaps quarterly, to review progress and offer suggestions. Thank you, Victoria replied, clearly relieved. That's more than generous. As they made their way back downstairs to the main floor of the boutique, Dolores noticed that the atmosphere had subtly changed. The other sales associates, who had watched their manager escort Michael Jordan and his mother upstairs an hour earlier, now stood at respectful attention, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Michael paused at the watch, counter where the whole incident had begun. "My mother was interested in that watch," he said to the young associate who had initially dismissed Dolores. "Perhaps you could show it to her properly this time." The woman, her face flushed with embarrassment, quickly moved to the display case. "Of course, Mr. Jordan. Mrs. Jordan, I'd be happy to show you our celestial collection." She carefully removed the silver watch with the mother-of-pearl face, placing it on a velvet pad and sliding it respectfully toward Dolores. "It's a beautiful piece," the associate said, her tone professional and courteous. "The mother-of-pearl face is sourced from sustainable operations in the South Pacific, and the movement is Swiss, hand-assembled by master craftsmen." Dolores examined the watch, turning it over in her hands. It was indeed beautiful, elegant without being flashy, sophisticated but practical, just right for Jasmine. "I'll take it," she said, looking directly at the young woman. "Wonderful choice," the associate replied, her manner now impeccably professional. "Would you like it gift-wrapped? We have several options available." "That would be nice," Dolores agreed. As the transaction was completed, Bradley emerged from the back office, his expression still subdued but his manner respectful. "Mrs. Jordan," he said quietly, "thank you again for your generosity of spirit today. I won't forget it." Dolores nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond verbally. Some lessons were best reinforced by allowing people time to reflect on their own behavior without immediate reassurance. Outside on Michigan Avenue, as they walked back toward their waiting car, Michael placed a protective arm around his mother's shoulders. "Was that how you imagined it would go?" he asked. Dolores considered the question. "Not exactly," she admitted. "I thought there would be more defensiveness, more excuses." Victoria surprised me with her willingness to acknowledge the problem and take responsibility. "She impressed me, too," Michael agreed. "But the real star of the show was you, Mom. The way you handled that situation was masterful. You turned what could have been just another publicly shamed business into an opportunity for real change." Dolores smiled up at her son. "I had a good teacher," she said, thinking of James and his unfailing belief in addressing problems with dignity rather than anger. "And so did you." As they settled into the back seat of the car, Dolores held the small bag containing Jasmine's graduation gift. What had begun as a humiliating rejection had somehow transformed into something positive, not just a personal redemption, but the beginning of what might become meaningful change. "Do you think they'll follow through?" Michael asked as the car pulled away from the curb. "Or is this just damage control because of who we are?" "I don't know," Dolores admitted. "People often have good intentions in the moment, especially when faced with consequences. The real test comes later, when the immediate pressure is off." "That's why I want to stay involved," Michael said. "Make sure they actually implement the changes they promised." Dolores nodded agreement. "And that's why I agreed to consult. Not because I want to punish them, but because I want to help them succeed. Real change takes time and consistent effort. It doesn't happen overnight." As the car navigated through Chicago's busy streets, Dolores felt a weight lifting from her heart. The incident that had brought them here hadn't been erased. Nothing could do that. But it had been transformed from a painful memory into the beginning of something constructive. And in that transformation lay the essence of what she and James had always tried to teach their children: that difficulties could become opportunities, that personal hurts could lead to broader healing, and that dignity was found not in avoiding problems, but in addressing them with wisdom and grace. Looking at Michael beside her, tall and confident yet still so clearly her son, Dolores felt a surge of pride. Despite fame and fortune that might have carried him far from the values of his upbringing, he had remembered the most important lessons. When faced with injustice, he had sought not revenge, but rectification. Not public humiliation, but private transformation. James would indeed be proud of the path they had chosen today. The next morning, Dolores and Michael had breakfast at a small cafe near their hotel, away from the bustle of Michigan Avenue. Despite the previous day's emotional journey, Dolores felt oddly at peace. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching as sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden patterns on the tablecloth. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Michael asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Your father," she replied simply. "How he always believed that true strength comes from how you handle difficulties, not from avoiding them." Michael nodded, his expression softening at the mention of James. Though it had been over 30 years since his father's tragic death, the loss still resonated deeply for all of them. "I was thinking about him yesterday too," Michael admitted. "When that store manager started apologizing all over himself, part of me wanted to make him squirm more. But then I heard Dad's voice in my head saying, 'The goal isn't to make people feel small, son. It's to help them grow.'" Dolores smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her son's hand. "He would be so proud of the man you've become, Michael. Not because of the championships or the business success, but because of moments like yesterday, when you could have used your power to punish, but chose instead to use it to improve." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Scottie Pippen, who joined them for breakfast as planned. After ordering coffee, he leaned forward eagerly. "So, how did it go? Do I need to help MJ buy a store so we can fire some people?" His tone was light, but his eyes were serious as they moved from Michael to Dolores. Michael grinned, shaking his head. "Not necessary. Mom worked her magic, as usual." As they ate, Michael and Dolores recounted the previous day's events, the initial confrontation, the meeting with Victoria Pierce, and the plans for transforming both the store's practices and its culture. "That's not what I expected," Scottie admitted when they finished. "I figured there'd be more, I don't know, consequences." "There were consequences," Dolores corrected gently. "Just not the punitive kind you're thinking of." Bradley Williams has been tasked with leading an initiative that will force him to confront his own biases and preconceptions. "That's harder than simply losing a job." Scottie looked skeptical. "You really think people can change like that? Someone who judges others by how they look or what they wear?" "I do," Dolores said firmly. "I've seen it happen throughout my life. During the civil rights era, I watched people who had held deeply prejudiced views gradually transform as they got to know individuals they had previously judged as a group." "It doesn't always work," Michael added. "Some people are too set in their ways. But Mom's right. Giving someone a chance to grow from their mistakes is often more effective than just punishing them." Scottie considered this, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "So, what's next? You mentioned a scholarship program?" "Yes," Michael confirmed. "Victoria and I are going to work out the details. We're thinking of focusing on young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who are interested in retail, fashion, or luxury goods management. Full tuition, internships, mentoring, a real pathway into an industry that's traditionally been pretty exclusive. And I'll be consulting with them quarterly," Dolores added, "helping them develop and implement their inclusivity training and community outreach programs." "All because of a rude salesman," Scottie marveled, shaking his head. "Only you, Mrs." Jordan could turn an insult into an opportunity like this. After breakfast, as they walked back to their hotel, Dolores found herself reflecting on Scotty's words. It hadn't been her intention to create something positive from the incident at first. She had simply wanted to forget it had happened. But Michael's determination to address it had opened a door that might otherwise have remained closed. In their suite, as Dolores packed for their return flight to North Carolina, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria Pierce's name. They had exchanged contact information the previous day. "Mrs. Jordan," Victoria said when Dolores answered, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Dolores assured her. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Victoria replied. "Actually, better than all right. I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking all night about our conversation, and I've already taken some initial steps." "What kind of steps?" Dolores asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I've scheduled a meeting with my entire staff for tomorrow morning," Victoria explained. "Not just to discuss what happened with you, but to begin a broader conversation about how we interact with all our customers." "That's good to hear," Dolores said sincerely. "And Bradley has already reached out to that community center you mentioned," Victoria continued. "He's arranging to volunteer there starting next week." Dolores felt a surge of cautious optimism. These were small steps, but they suggested genuine commitment rather than mere damage control. "There's something else," Victoria added, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "Something I didn't share yesterday because it felt too private for a business meeting." "Oh?" Dolores prompted gently. "When I told you about coming to America as a refugee, about working as a cleaner in that jewelry store, I didn't tell you everything," Victoria said. "The day I finally saved enough to buy those earrings, when the saleswoman questioned whether I could afford them, there was another customer in the store, an older woman who noticed what was happening." Dolores waited, sensing the importance. "Of this story," she stepped in, Victoria continued, not dramatically, not angrily. She simply said to the saleswoman, "Perhaps you could show this young lady the proper respect while she makes her purchase." The saleswoman changed her attitude immediately. "That was kind of her," Dolores observed. "It was more than kind," Victoria replied. "It was transformative. That moment stayed with me, not just the humiliation from the saleswoman, but the dignity offered by that stranger. When I opened my own store years later, I named it Platinum Elite, partly in homage to that woman. She was wearing a platinum wedding band, the only jewelry she had on, but she carried herself with such elite grace." Victoria paused before continuing. "Yesterday, when you spoke about dignity being every person's birthright, not something earned through wealth, you reminded me of her, and I realized how far I've strayed from the principles that inspired me to start this business in the first place." Dolores felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly. "No, thank you," Victoria countered, "for being that kind of woman again, this time for me and for Bradley, for offering dignity where you could have demanded retribution." After they said their goodbyes, Dolores sat quietly for a moment, holding the phone in her lap. The conversation had touched her deeply, reminding her that the ripples from acts of kindness or unkindness often spread far beyond what we can see. When Michael returned to the suite, he found his mother gazing thoughtfully out the window. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. Dolores turned, smiling at her son. "Yes, better than okay, actually. Victoria just called with an update. They're already implementing some of the changes we discussed." "That's good," Michael said, though he still looked slightly skeptical. "I hope they follow through long term." "I think they will," Dolores replied. Victoria shared something personal with me about an experience she had as a young immigrant that shaped her original vision for the store. Yesterday reminded her of why she started the business in the first place. "What was that?" Michael asked, sitting beside her on the small sofa. "To create a place where everyone is treated with respect, regardless of appearance or background," Dolores explained. Somewhere along the way, she lost sight of that vision. But I believe she genuinely wants to find it again. Michael studied his mother's face. "You really do believe in people's capacity to change, don't you?" "I have to," Dolores said simply. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? If we don't believe people can grow and learn and become better, then why bother addressing problems at all?" Michael nodded slowly. "Dad used to say something similar, that the true measure of a person isn't where they start, but how far they're willing to travel." "He was a wise man, your father," Dolores said, her voice warm with memory. "And you've inherited more of that wisdom than you sometimes realize." Later that afternoon, as their private jet lifted off from Chicago's O'Hare Airport, Dolores gazed down at the sprawling city below. Somewhere down there was a luxury boutique where, just 24 hours earlier, difficult conversations had led to the beginning of positive change. "You know," Michael said, interrupting her thoughts, "we never did talk about what this whole experience was like for you. We focused on the solutions, on moving forward. But it must have hurt, being treated that way." Dolores considered her answer carefully. "Yes, it hurt," she acknowledged. "No matter how many times you experience prejudice or dismissal, it never stops stinging. But what happened afterward? That helped heal the wound." "How so?" Michael asked. "Being heard," Dolores explained. "Having the opportunity to transform something painful into something constructive. Those things matter more than most people realize." She reached into her handbag and touched the small box containing the watch she had purchased for Jasmine. Despite her initial plan to give her granddaughter the pearl necklace instead, Dolores had decided that both gifts held meaning now, the pearls representing family history and James's love, the watch symbolizing the importance of standing up for dignity and respect. "You know," she continued, "when I was a young mother raising you children in Wilmington, I used to worry constantly about preparing you for a world that might judge you unfairly. I taught you to speak properly, to dress neatly even when we couldn't afford new clothes, to be twice as respectful, twice as hard-working as your white classmates." Michael nodded, remembering those early lessons. "But the most important thing I tried to teach all of you wasn't about how to avoid prejudice," Dolores said. "It was about how to respond to it with dignity rather than bitterness, with determination to improve things rather than resignation that they'll never change." "You taught us well," Michael assured her, "though sometimes I need reminding." Dolores smiled at her son. "We all do, from time to time." As the plane leveled off above the clouds, Dolores felt a profound sense of completion. The incident at Platinum Elite had come full circle, from humiliation to healing, from rejection to respect. And in that journey lay a lesson not just for those directly involved, but perhaps for others as well. She thought of Bradley Williams, the sales manager whose condescension had sparked this chain of events. Would his experience truly change him? Would his work at the community center open his eyes to the dignity inherent in every person, regardless of wealth or status? And what about Victoria Pierce? Would her renewed commitment to her original vision sustain itself beyond the immediate aftermath of this incident? There were no guarantees, of course. People didn't always live up to their best intentions or learn from their mistakes, but Dolores had lived long enough to know that transformation was always possible, that even small shifts in perspective could lead to meaningful change over time. As she had told James many years ago, when he questioned whether their efforts to raise their children with values of dignity and respect would matter in a world that often seemed to honor neither. We plant seeds, not knowing exactly how they'll grow or when they'll bear fruit. But we plant them anyway, because that's how gardens grow, one seed at a time. Today, they had planted seeds at Platinum Elite. Whether they would flourish remained to be seen, but the planting itself had been an act of faith. Faith in the iturtishiu, possibility of growth, in the potential for positive change, in the capacity of human beings to learn and evolve. And in that faith, Dolores recognized not just her own wisdom, but James's as well. The quiet, steady belief that had guided their life together and continued to guide her still, even decades after his passing. From his eternal perspective, James would indeed be proud of the path they had chosen today, a path of dignity over retribution, of education over humiliation, of transformation over mere punishment. It was, after all, the path they had always walked together, through joys and sorrows, through triumphs and challenges, the path of making the world a little better, one interaction at a time. 2 weeks after their return from Chicago, Dolores sat at her kitchen table in Wilmington, reviewing her calendar for the upcoming month. Her volunteer work at the local food bank, church activities, and mentoring sessions with young mothers filled most days, the routine that had anchored her life since James's passing. But now there was something new, a conference call scheduled, with Victoria Pierce to discuss progress on the initiatives at Platinum Elite. Dolores had been pleasantly surprised when Victoria called 3 days after their meeting to share updates and ask for input on their training program. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Michael. "Mom," he said without preamble, "have you seen the news?" "What news?" she asked, immediately concerned by his tone. "About Platinum Elite. Someone who was in the store that day must have recognized me and shared the story online." "It's gone viral." Dolores felt her stomach tighten. "What exactly are they saying?" "Nothing bad," Michael assured her quickly. "Just that I confronted a luxury store manager who had discriminated against my mother. Most of the comments are supportive, praising you for handling it with dignity rather than making a scene." "Still," Dolores sighed, "I had hoped this would remain private, a chance for real change without public pressure or judgment." "I know," Michael agreed, "but maybe this is good in a way. It puts more accountability on them to follow through with the changes they promised." After hanging up, Dolores checked her email to find a message from Victoria, sent just minutes earlier. "Mrs. Jordan, you've likely heard about the social media situation. I want to assure you that we remain committed to the path we discussed, regardless of this public attention. In fact, we're accelerating our plans." Bradley started volunteering at the Southside Community Center last week. He's been surprisingly dedicated, staying longer than required and genuinely engaging with the seniors there. He asked me to pass along that he's learning more than he expected. "Our staff training begins tomorrow. Would you be willing to join us via video call for a short portion? Your perspective would be invaluable." With respect and gratitude, Victoria Pierce Dolores considered the request carefully. Her initial instinct was to decline, to maintain distance from a situation that had now become more public than she had wanted. But something in Victoria's message suggested genuine commitment rather than mere damage control. The next morning, Dolores connected to the video call from her living room. On her screen, she could see a conference room at Platinum Elite. where about 15 employees sat around a large table with Victoria standing at the head. Bradley was there too, sitting slightly apart from the others, his expression serious but engaged. "Thank you for joining us, Mrs. Jordan," Victoria said warmly. "We're honored to have you here, even virtually." Dolores nodded acknowledgement. "I'm happy to help if I can." Victoria turned to her staff. "As I explained earlier, we're implementing comprehensive changes in how we operate, starting with how we perceive and treat our customers. Mrs. Jordan has graciously agreed to share her perspective on why this matters. For the next 15 minutes, Dolores spoke simply but powerfully about dignity, what it means to be seen and valued as a human being regardless of external appearances or circumstances. She shared stories from her own life, not just the recent incident at their store, but experiences dating back to her childhood in rural North Carolina during segregation. "When someone dismisses you based on how you look," she explained, "they're not just being rude. They're denying your humanity, your worth. And that's something no one has the right to do to another person." She noticed several employees shifting uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps recognizing their own behaviors in her words. Others nodded in understanding or took notes. Bradley watched intently, his eyes never leaving her face on the large screen at the end of the room. "I don't believe most people who make these judgments do so out of deliberate malice," Dolores continued. "Often, it's unconscious bias, assumptions we absorb from our environment without even realizing it. The key is becoming aware of these biases and actively working to overcome them." After she finished speaking, several staff members asked thoughtful questions. One young woman, who identified herself as a newer sales associate, tearfully admitted that she had been trained informally by more experienced colleagues to focus her attention on customers who looked the part. "I didn't question it," she said. "It seemed like just another aspect of the job. But hearing your experience, Mrs. Jordan, makes me realize how harmful that approach can be." Victoria used this moment to introduce the revised incentive structure she had developed. Instead of rewarding sales associates solely based on sales volume, the new system would include metrics for customer service quality, measured through follow-up surveys and mystery shoppers representing diverse backgrounds and appearances. "Our goal is to create an environment where everyone who walks through our doors feels valued," Victoria explained. "Not because they might be secretly wealthy or famous, but because treating people with dignity is simply the right thing to do." As the meeting concluded, Bradley asked to speak. His usual polished confidence had been replaced by something more genuine, a humbler but somehow more authentic presence. "I've been at the community center Mrs. Jordan recommended for just 1 week, he said. "Already, I've had my assumptions challenged repeatedly. There's a woman there, she must be in her 80s, who comes in wearing clothes from decades ago. My first day, I found myself automatically treating her differently, speaking more slowly, being overly helpful in a condescending way. He paused, looking directly at the camera where Dolores could see him. Then I learned she was once a professor of economics at the University of Chicago. She chose to live simply so she could donate most of her salary to educational programs in underserved communities. She's probably given away more money than I'll earn in my lifetime." The room was silent as his words sank in. Bradley continued, "That's just one example of how appearances can be deceiving. But the bigger point is that it shouldn't matter who she is or what she's accomplished. Every person deserves to be treated with respect from the moment they walk in, whether they're a professor or not, whether they're wealthy or not." After the call ended, Dolores sat quietly in her living room, processing what she had witnessed. There had been a genuine quality to the meeting that gave her hope. Not rehearsed corporate language about inclusivity, but real people grappling with uncomfortable truths and seeking to do better. The following week, a small package arrived at Dolores's home. Inside was a handwritten note from Victoria. "Dear Mrs. Jordan, I thought you might appreciate this token of our ongoing commitment to the changes we discussed. It's a simple reminder that appearances rarely tell the whole story. With gratitude." Victoria, beneath the note was a small silver pin in the shape of a door, half open, as if inviting someone to enter. Engraved on its surface were the words, "Dignity opens doors." Victoria had included a brief explanation. The pin was now part of the standard uniform for all Platinum Elite staff, a daily reminder of the store's renewed commitment to treating every customer with equal respect. Meanwhile, Michael had been working with his foundation team to develop the scholarship program they had discussed. One evening, he called Dolores to share their progress. "We're calling it the Dignity Initiative," he explained. "It will provide full scholarships for 10 students annually from underrepresented backgrounds to study retail management, fashion design, or luxury brand marketing." "That sounds wonderful," Dolores said warmly. "But here's the best part," Michael continued, excitement evident in his voice. "Victoria isn't just contributing financially. She's arranging internships at Platinum Elite and at other high-end retailers in her network. And Bradley has volunteered to be a mentor in the program." "Bradley?" Dolores asked, surprised. "Is he qualified for that?" "Actually, yes," Michael replied. "Before he went into luxury retail, he taught business courses at a community college. But beyond that, Victoria says he's been transformed by his experience at the community center. He's there 3 days a week now, not just the one day they initially agreed on." Dolores felt a cautious optimism growing. Perhaps real change was possible after all. Not just surface-level adjustments to avoid bad publicity, but genuine transformation of hearts and minds. The news story about the incident continued to spread, with business publications picking it up as an example of how companies could respond constructively to instances of bias. Several other luxury retailers reached out to Victoria for advice on implementing similar training programs, leading to discussions about an industry-wide initiative. 3 months after their Chicago visit, Dolores received an invitation to speak at a retail industry conference about creating inclusive customer experiences. Her first instinct was to decline. Public speaking had never been her preference, and the growing attention made her uncomfortable. But when Michael called to discuss it, he offered a perspective she hadn't considered. "Think about it, Mom," he said. "How many other people have experienced what you did, but didn't have the means to address it? Your story could help change how an entire industry operates." Dolores sighed. "I never wanted to be the face of this issue, Michael. I just wanted to buy a watch for my granddaughter without being judged by how I was dressed." "I know," Michael replied gently. "But sometimes life puts us in positions we didn't choose for purposes we couldn't have imagined. Dad used to say that, remember?" She did remember. It had been one of James's favorite sayings during difficult times, that challenges often contained hidden opportunities to make a difference. After careful consideration, Dolores agreed to speak at the conference, but with conditions. No media, interviews, no photographs, and she would share the platform with Victoria and Bradley to focus on solutions rather than just highlighting problems. The conference organizers readily agreed, and plans were made for Dolores to travel to New York in June, a trip that would coincide with Jasmine's graduation from UNC. The weekend before her departure, Dolores received another unexpected call, this time from Bradley Williams himself. "Mrs. Jordan," he began, his voice hesitant, "I hope I'm not overstepping by calling you directly. Victoria provided your number, but if this is unwelcome..." "It's fine, Mr. Williams," Dolores assured him, curious about the purpose of his call. "How can I help you?" "Actually, I'm calling to thank you," he said. "These past months have been transformative for me. The work at the community center especially. I've formed relationships there that have changed how I see the world." "I'm glad to hear that," Dolores said sincerely. "There's something specific I wanted to share," Bradley continued. "Yesterday, a woman came into the store wearing clothes that, 3 months ago, would have led me to assume she couldn't afford our products. My old self would have steered her toward less expensive items or suggested she might be more comfortable elsewhere." He paused before continuing. "Instead, I greeted her exactly as I would any customer. I showed her the pieces she was interested in, explained their features, and treated her with complete respect. She ended up purchasing a watch that cost over $40,000 for her son, who had just made partner at his law firm." "That's a good outcome," Dolores acknowledged. "The sale itself isn't the point," Bradley clarified quickly. "The point is that even if she had bought nothing, she left feeling respected. She actually commented on it, saying she'd had very different experiences in other luxury stores. But here's what really matters. I didn't treat her well because I thought she might be secretly wealthy. I treated her well because, thanks to you, I now understand it's what every human being deserves." As they continued talking, Dolores was struck by the genuine change she heard in his voice, not just in his words, but in the humility and thoughtfulness behind them. This wasn't the polished, condescending sales manager she had encountered 3 months earlier, but a man actively engaged in reconsidering long-held assumptions and behaviors. When they ended the call, Dolores sat at her kitchen table thinking about the journey that had brought them all to this point. What had begun as a painful rejection had somehow sparked meaningful change, not just for her personally, but potentially for many others whose names she would never know. It reminded her of something James used to tell the children when they were upset about injustices they encountered. "Don't just get angry. Get strategic. Figure out how to change the situation not just for yourself, but for the next person who comes along." That philosophy had guided her approach to the Platinum Elite incident from the moment she had agreed to return there with Michael. Not revenge, not public shaming, but strategic change that could ripple outward far beyond a single store or a single customer's experience. As Dolores prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking of James. As she often did at day's end, she imagined him witnessing all that had unfolded from these past months, the difficult conversations, the commitments to change, the small but significant transformations in perspective and behavior. "We're planting seeds, James," she whispered to his memory. "Just like we always did. Small seeds that might grow into something beautiful." And somewhere beyond the veil that separated them, she felt certain he was smiling in agreement. The New York Retail Conference was scheduled for the second week of June, giving Dolores just enough time to attend Jasmine's graduation at UNC first. The family gathered in Chapel Hill on a perfect spring morning. Michael and his current wife, Jeffrey and his family, Larry and Brenda with their teenagers, and Dolores's daughters with their children. Only James was missing from this milestone celebration, though Dolores felt his presence in the values that had shaped their granddaughter into the impressive young woman receiving her diploma today. Jasmine crossed the stage with confident strides, the pearl necklace that had once been Dolores's glinting in the sunlight. After the ceremony, amid hugs and photographs, Jasmine approached her grandmother with a small box. "I have something for you, Grandma," she said, pressing the package into Dolores's hands. "For me? But this is your day, sweetheart. Open it," Jasmine insisted, her eyes bright with excitement. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, with a single charm, a miniature basketball. "Turn it over," Jasmine prompted. Engraved on the back of the charm were the words, "With dignity, always." J&J, James and Jasmine, the grandfather she had never met, and the granddaughter who carried his values forward. "Your dad told me about what happened in Chicago," Jasmine explained, her voice soft. "About how you handled it with such grace. I wanted you to have something to remember that sometimes the hardest moments bring the most important changes." Tears welled in Dolores's eyes as she hugged her granddaughter tightly. "You remind me so much of your grandfather," she whispered. "He would have been so proud of you today." Later that evening, as the family celebrated at Michael's house in Chapel Hill, Dolores found herself watching Bradley Williams's transformation from a distance. Through video calls and occasional updates from Victoria, she had witnessed his journey from a condescending sales manager to someone genuinely committed to change. The most striking development had been his deepening involvement with the South Side Community Center. What had begun as a required volunteer assignment had evolved into a personal mission. Bradley now spent 3 afternoons a week there, not just serving meals or organizing activities, but forming real relationships with the seniors who frequented the center. "Mom?" Michael's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Everything okay? You've been quiet tonight." Dolores smiled, touching the new bracelet on her wrist. "I'm fine, just thinking about unexpected journeys." "Like Bradley Williams?" Michael guessed, sitting beside her on the patio where she had sought a moment of quiet. "Partly," she admitted. "It's remarkable how people can change when given the opportunity." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Victoria sent me a video last week of Bradley leading a training session for new employees. It was impressive. The guy genuinely gets it now." "What exactly does he get?" Dolores asked, curious about her son's assessment. "That respect isn't something you earn through wealth or status," Michael replied. "That it's the baseline everyone deserves just for being human." Dolores smiled, hearing her own words echoed back to her. "That's what your father always taught you children. Respect first, judgments later, if at all." As they sat in companionable silence, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk, Michael asked, "Are you ready for New York next week? The conference organizers called me again, trying to get you to do press interviews beforehand." "And I'm still declining," Dolores said firmly. "This isn't about publicity, Michael. It's about creating meaningful change." 3 days later, Dolores arrived in New York, accompanied by Michael, who had insisted on joining her despite his busy schedule. Victoria and Bradley met them at their hotel, where they gathered in a private meeting room to prepare for the next day's panel discussion. Bradley looked different than Dolores remembered, less polished somehow, but more genuine. The expensive suit and flashy tie had been replaced by more subdued attire, and the condescending smile was gone, replaced by a thoughtful, slightly nervous expression. "Mrs. Jordan," he said, greeting her with respectful warmth. "Thank you again for agreeing to share the stage with us tomorrow. Your perspective is invaluable." Dolores nodded acknowledgement, still somewhat reserved in her interactions with him, despite the positive reports she had received. "I'm curious to hear more about your experiences these past months, Mr. Williams. Victoria tells me you've become quite involved at the community center." For the next hour, as they discussed the format for tomorrow's panel, Bradley shared stories from his time volunteering, not with the self-congratulatory tone of someone seeking praise for charity work, but with the humility of a person genuinely transformed by unexpected relationships. He spoke of Martha Coleman, the former economics professor he had mentioned previously, who had become something of a mentor to him. He described animated debates about economic policy that challenged his long-held assumptions about wealth and value. And he spoke of Walter Johnson, an 87-year-old former janitor whose dignity and wisdom had profoundly affected him. Walter worked as a custodian at the University of Chicago for 40 years, Bradley explained. Never made more than minimum wage, lived in the same small apartment his entire adult life. But the way he carries himself, the respect he shows, to everyone regardless of their station in life, it's humbling. Humbling how? Dolores asked. Bradley considered the question carefully. I've spent my career cultivating an image of success. The right clothes, the right watch, the right address. I judged others by those same superficial markers. But Walter has none of those things, and yet he has a dignity that's innate, unshakable. It made me realize how much time I've wasted on things that don't actually matter. Victoria, who had been listening quietly, added, That's been the most remarkable part of this journey. Watching Bradley's perspective shift so dramatically. It's affected our entire staff culture. The changes we've implemented aren't just policies on paper. They're being embraced as values. Michael, ever the pragmatist, asked, And what about the bottom line? Has treating all customers with equal respect regardless of their appearance affected your sales? Victoria smiled. Actually, our sales are up 12% over the same period last year. It turns out that creating a genuinely welcoming environment attracts more customers, not fewer. We've had several people specifically mention that they chose our store because they'd heard about our new approach. The next morning, the conference room at the Javits Center was packed with retail executives, store managers, and industry consultants. The panel, titled Beyond Bias: Creating Truly Inclusive Luxury Retail Experiences, was one of the most anticipated sessions of the conference. As Dolores took her seat between Victoria and Bradley, she felt a flutter of nervousness. Public speaking had never been her preference, but she reminded herself why she was here. Not for herself, but for all the people who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. The moderator, a respected retail industry journalist, opened with a brief overview of the incident at Platinum Elite, carefully framed not as a scandal, but as a catalyst for positive change. Then she turned to Dolores. Mrs. Jordan, can you share with us what that experience was like for you, and why you chose to address it the way you did? Dolores leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady and clear. What happened to me at Platinum Elite is something many people experience every day, being judged by appearance rather than character. The difference is that I had resources most people don't. A famous son, and the confidence that comes from decades of life experience. She paused, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. I chose to address it not through public shaming or retribution, but through education and transformation. My late husband James and I always taught our children that true change comes not from tearing down, but from building up, not from punishment, but from growth. For the next hour, the panel discussed practical strategies for creating retail, environments where all customers feel valued. Victoria shared specific policies they had implemented, from revised training protocols to new incentive structures that rewarded customer service quality over mere sales volume. But it was Bradley's contribution that seemed to resonate most powerfully with the audience. He spoke with raw honesty about his own biases, about how readily he had judged customers based on superficial characteristics, and about the profound shift in perspective that had come from his experiences at the community center. I was the problem, he admitted frankly. Me and thousands of others like me in retail environments across the country. People who have been trained to equate worth with wealth, to make snap judgments based on appearance. And the truth is, we're not just hurting potential customers when we do this. We're hurting ourselves by limiting our understanding of human value to the narrowest possible metrics. A retail executive in the front row raised her hand during the question period. "This all sounds admirable," she said, "but how do you balance inclusivity with the exclusive nature of luxury retail? Isn't the whole point of luxury that not everyone can access it?" Bradley leaned forward, his response immediate and passionate. Luxury should be exclusive based on price point, not on how someone looks when they walk through the door. True luxury isn't about making people feel excluded. It's about exceptional quality, craftsmanship, and service available to anyone who values and can afford it. Victoria nodded agreement. "We've discovered that treating everyone with equal respect actually enhances the luxury experience for all our customers. It creates an environment of genuine graciousness rather than artificial exclusivity." When the panel concluded, Dolores was surprised by the number of retail executives who approached her privately, many sharing similar stories of bias they had witnessed or, in some cases, perpetuated in their own establishments. Several asked for her input on training programs they were developing, while others simply wanted to express appreciation for her willingness to share her experience. One older gentleman, the owner of a high-end watch boutique in Boston, shook her hand with tears in his eyes. "My mother would have faced the same treatment in many stores," he said quietly, "including, I'm ashamed to say, possibly my own. That changes today." That evening, Michael hosted a small dinner in a private room at a renowned New York restaurant. The guests included Victoria, Bradley, and several retail industry leaders who had expressed genuine interest in implementing similar changes in their own establishments. As they enjoyed their meal, Dolores observed Bradley interacting with the other guests. The arrogant sales manager she had first encountered was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a man who listened more than he spoke, who shared credit readily, and who seemed genuinely engaged in helping others understand the lessons he had learned. At one point, Bradley excused himself from the table. When he returned a few minutes later, Dolores noticed he had been crying. Concerned, she approached him when the opportunity presented itself. "Is everything all right, Mr. Williams?" she asked gently. Bradley nodded, composing himself. "Yes, I just received a text from Walter, the gentleman I mentioned from the community center. He watched the live stream of our panel today. He said," Bradley's voice caught. "He said he was proud of me. That my grandmother would have been proud too." "Your grandmother?" Dolores inquired. "She raised me after my parents died," Bradley explained. "She worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in New York. When I was young, she would sometimes take me with her to work during school breaks. I saw how those families treated her, like she was invisible, less than human." He paused, visibly struggling with the memory. "I promised myself then that I would never be in her position, that I would be on the other side, the side with power and status. Somewhere along the way, I became exactly what I had hated as a child." Dolores placed a gentle hand on his arm. "But now you've remembered who you really are," she said softly. "The grandson who recognized injustice and wanted to fight against it." Bradley nodded, blinking back tears. "Walter reminds me of her. The same quiet dignity, the same kindness despite how the world has treated him. When he said she would be proud," he shook his head, unable to continue. In that moment, Dolores saw Bradley not as the man who had humiliated her in a luxury boutique, but as a human being carrying his own wounds and history. Someone who had lost his way, but was finding it again, step by step. "Your grandmother is proud," she said with quiet certainty. "Just as James is proud of what we're doing here today." As they rejoined the group, Dolores found herself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought them all to this point. What had begun as a painful rejection had transformed into a catalyst for meaningful change, not just for her personally, but for Bradley, for Victoria, and potentially for an entire industry's approach to customer service and human dignity. It reminded her of something James used to say when facing difficulties. The stone that causes you to stumble can become the cornerstone of something beautiful, if you have the wisdom to see its potential. The rejection at Platinum Elite had indeed been a stumbling stone. But through patience, wisdom, and a refusal to be defined by bitterness, it was becoming the cornerstone of positive transformation that would affect far more lives than her own. And that, Dolores thought as she watched Bradley earnestly discussing implementation strategies with a retail executive from Chicago, was the most powerful legacy one could hope to leave. The transformation of pain into progress, of rejection into respect, of humiliation into humility. Learning humility, both for Bradley and for all those touched by this experience, had become the unexpected gift hidden within an initially painful encounter. And in that gift lay the essence of what James had always believed, that even our most difficult experiences can become pathways to growth, not just for ourselves, but for others whose lives we touch along the way. The morning after the retail conference panel, Dolores woke to a flurry of text messages from family members. Michael had already left for an early breakfast meeting, so she was alone when she opened the first message. From Jasmine. "Grandma, you're trending on Twitter." Dignity Matters has over 50,000 posts. Puzzled, Dolores checked the other messages. They were all variations on the same theme. The panel discussion had gone viral overnight, with clips of her speaking about dignity and respect being shared across social media platforms. With growing concern, she turned on the television in her hotel room. Sure enough, a morning news program was showing a clip of yesterday's panel, with the headline, "Michael Jordan's mother transforms luxury retail after being rejected at high-end store." Dolores sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. The public spectacle, the focus on celebrity rather than substance, the potential for the story to become about humiliation instead of transformation. Her phone rang. It was Victoria. "Mrs. Jordan," she said, her voice both excited and concerned. "Have you seen the news?" "I'm looking at it right now," Dolores replied, her tone measured. "This isn't what I wanted, Victoria. I agreed to the panel to help create change within the industry, not to become a public story." "I understand," Victoria said sympathetically, "and I share your concern that the media might focus on the wrong aspects. But there's something you should know. The attention is overwhelmingly positive, and it's sparking exactly the kind of conversations we hoped for." Victoria explained that since the panel had been live-streamed, tens of thousands of people had watched it in its entirety. Not just the clip being shown on television. Social media was filled with thoughtful discussions about unconscious bias, about dignity in customer service, about the difference between exclusivity based on price point versus exclusivity based on appearance or background. And Bradley's part especially seems to be resonating, Victoria continued. His honesty about his own transformation is giving people a model for how to acknowledge biases and change behaviors without being defensive. As they spoke, Dolores's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Michael. She promised Victoria she would call back later and switched to her son's call. "Mom," Michael said immediately, "I'm so sorry about this. I know you didn't want media attention." "It's not your fault," Dolores assured him. "No one could have predicted this would go viral." "Actually," Michael admitted, The conference organizers are telling me the live stream had unusually high viewership because they promoted your participation. They didn't use your name in the marketing materials as we requested. But they did highlight that the panel would feature a family member of a renowned sports figure discussing bias in luxury retail. Dolores sighed. Of course. Even without using her name directly, the organizers had found a way to leverage Michael's fame to draw attention to the panel. What matters now, Michael continued, is how we handle this. Do you want me to issue a statement asking for privacy? Or should we use this opportunity to amplify the message about dignity and respect? It was a question Dolores had never expected to face. Throughout Michael's career, she had deliberately stayed in the background, supporting him privately while avoiding public attention. When James was killed in 1993, she had declined all interview requests despite intense media interest. Even when Michael established their family foundation, she had participated quietly, focusing on the work rather than the recognition. But this situation felt different. The message being shared about treating all people with respect, regardless of appearance or background, was one she and James had spent their lives trying to instill in their children. Perhaps this unexpected platform was an opportunity to extend that teaching beyond their family circle. No statement, she decided, but no interviews either. Let the panel speak for itself. If the conversation stays focused on the issues rather than on me personally, that's a positive outcome. By noon, the story had spread to major news outlets across the country. Most focused respectfully on the substance of the panel rather than sensationalizing the original incident, though a few tabloids took a more dramatic approach with headlines like, "Jordan's mom gets revenge on snobby store manager." Victoria called again, this time with unexpected news. The National Retail Federation wants to develop an industry-wide training program based on our approach at Platinum Elite. They're asking if you would consider being involved as an advisor. Dolores's initial instinct was to decline. She had never sought a public role, and the growing attention made her uncomfortable. But then she thought of all the people who experienced what she had at Platinum Elite without having the resources or platform to address it. "I'll consider it," she told Victoria, "but only if Bradley is involved as well." His perspective, as someone who has recognized and overcome his own biases, is essential. That afternoon, Dolores met with Michael, Victoria, and Bradley in the hotel's private conference room to discuss how to respond to the growing media interest. As they talked, Bradley's phone kept buzzing with notifications. "I'm sorry," he said, checking the screen and looking increasingly astonished. This is overwhelming. Store managers and sales associates from across the country are reaching out to me privately, sharing similar experiences, and asking how to implement changes in their own establishments." "That's encouraging," Michael observed. "It suggests the impact could go well beyond Platinum Elite." Victoria nodded agreement. "The question is how to sustain this momentum once the initial media interest fades. That's always the challenge with viral stories. They create awareness, but not necessarily lasting change. Unless," Dolores suggested quietly, "we develop structures to support ongoing transformation, like the scholarship program and the training initiative we've been discussing." As they continued planning, a hotel staff member knocked on the door with an urgent message for Dolores. To her surprise, it was from Martha Coleman, the former economics professor who had become Bradley's mentor at the community center. "She's in the lobby," the staff member explained. "She saw the panel online and took a train from Chicago this morning. She says it's important." Curious and slightly concerned, Dolores asked that Martha be shown to their meeting room. Moments later, an elegant elderly woman entered, leaning lightly on a cane. Despite her obviously dated clothing, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Mrs. Jordan," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Martha Coleman. I apologize for interrupting, but after watching your panel yesterday, I felt compelled to speak with you directly." Bradley immediately stood to offer Martha his chair, his manner respectful and warm as he introduced her to the others. "Professor Coleman has been instrumental in my education these past months," he explained, "though she would say she's merely been reminding me of things I should have known all along." Martha smiled at him affectionately before turning back to Dolores. "I've lived 82 years as a black woman in America," she said directly. "I've been followed in stores, ignored by salespeople, and treated as if I couldn't possibly afford quality goods, despite being a tenured professor with more than adequate resources." She paused, her gaze intense. "What you and Bradley and Ms. Pierce are doing isn't just about improving customer service or increasing sales. It's about human dignity at the most fundamental level. And I want to help." Martha explained that she had taught consumer economics for 30 years, focusing specifically on patterns of discrimination in retail environments. She had published extensive research on how unconscious bias affected customer experiences and sales outcomes. "The data is clear," she stated firmly. "Businesses that practice equitable treatment of all potential customers outperform those that don't, not just in terms of public perception, but in actual sales figures. Yet the practices persist because they're deeply ingrained and rarely challenged directly." For the next hour, Martha shared insights from her decades of research and personal experience, offering concrete suggestions for how the nascent Dignity Initiative could be structured for maximum impact. "What you need," she concluded, "is a comprehensive approach that addresses both the business case and the ethical imperative. Retailers respond to profit motives, but lasting change requires appealing to deeper values as well." By the time Martha left, promising to send relevant research papers and to participate in future planning calls, the small group had a much clearer vision for how to transform their response to a single incident into a movement for industry-wide change. As they continued refining their plans into the evening, Dolores found herself reflecting on how utterly unexpected this entire journey had been. 3 months ago, she had simply wanted to buy a watch for her granddaughter's graduation. Now she was somehow at the center of an emerging initiative to transform retail practices across the country. The irony wasn't lost on her. James had always taught their children that true influence comes not from seeking the spotlight, but from standing firm in your principles, even when no one is watching. Yet, here she was, suddenly visible to millions, because she had done exactly that. Quietly maintained her dignity in the face of disrespect, then chosen transformation over retribution when given the opportunity to respond. The next morning, as Dolores prepared to return to Wilmington, Michael arrived at her hotel room with a thick folder. The National Retail Federation sent over their proposal for the Dignity Initiative, he explained. They're suggesting a 3-pronged approach: industry-wide training standards, a certification program for retailers who meet specific inclusivity benchmarks, and the scholarship program we discussed for underrepresented youth entering the field. Dolores leafed through the detailed proposal, impressed by how quickly the organization had moved to develop a substantive response rather than merely issuing a public statement of support. "And they want to announce it next week," Michael continued, "with you, Victoria, and Bradley as founding advisors. Martha Coleman, too, if she's willing." Dolores closed the folder, suddenly overwhelmed by the scope of what was unfolding. "Michael, I never intended any of this. I just wanted to be treated with respect while shopping for Jasmine's graduation gift." Michael smiled gently at his mother. "I know, Mom, but sometimes our smallest actions have the biggest impacts. Dad used to say that, remember? that we never know which seemingly minor choice might turn out to be the pebble that starts an avalanche of change. She did remember. It had been one of James's favorite sayings when their children were discouraged about the slow pace of progress on issues they cared about. "Keep doing what's right," he would tell them. "You never know which small act of courage or kindness might be the one that finally breaks through." As their car headed toward the airport later that morning, Dolores's phone rang with a call from Jasmine. "Grandma," her granddaughter said excitedly, "have you seen what's happening online? People are sharing stories with the hashtag #MyDignityMoment, times when they stood up for their own dignity or someone else's in retail settings. It's amazing." Dolores hadn't seen this development, having deliberately avoided social media since the panel went viral. As Jasmine described some of the stories being shared, Dolores felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride that the conversation was focused on dignity rather than humiliation, concern about her own unexpected visibility, and a growing sense that perhaps this had all unfolded exactly as it needed to. "There's even a challenge going around," Jasmine continued. "People are asking luxury retailers to have their executives and sales staff volunteer in community centers or other settings where they interact with people different from their usual clientele. They're calling it the Bradley Williams Challenge. Because of what he said in the panel about how volunteering changed his perspective." That made Dolores smile. Despite her initial reservations about Bradley, she had come to believe in the authenticity of his transformation. The fact that others were finding inspiration in his journey from bias to awareness was perhaps the most hopeful sign that lasting change might emerge from this unexpected sequence of events. Back in Wilmington the next day, Dolores returned to her normal routine, volunteering at the food bank, mentoring young mothers through her church program, tending her garden in the peaceful solitude that had always restored her spirit. But even here, ripples from the viral panel discussion had reached her community. Several volunteers at the food bank had seen the panel online and greeted her with newfound respect. Her pastor mentioned the hashtag campaign during Sunday service, connecting it to biblical teachings about human dignity and worth. And when she stopped at a local boutique to buy a birthday gift for her neighbor, the young sales associate recognized her and shared that the store owner had instituted new training procedures after watching the panel. A week later, as promised, the National Retail Federation announced the formal launch of the Dignity Initiative, with Dolores, Victoria, Bradley, and Martha Coleman named as founding advisors. The announcement generated another wave of media coverage, but this time, Dolores was better prepared for the attention. With guidance from Michael's public relations team, she issued a simple written statement emphasizing that the initiative wasn't about her personal experience, but about addressing a widespread issue that affected countless shoppers every day. "What happened to me at Platinum Elite happens to people across America daily, being judged by appearance rather than character. The difference was that I had resources most people don't, a famous son, and the confidence that comes from decades of life experience. The Dignity Initiative aims to ensure that everyone receives the respect they deserve, regardless of how they look or what they wear. True dignity isn't earned through wealth or status. It's the birthright of every human being." The statement was widely quoted in news coverage, shifting focus from the celebrity aspect of the story to its broader implications for retail practices nationwide. Meanwhile, Victoria reported that Platinum Elite had seen a 20% increase in customer orders. Traffic since the panel went viral, with many visitors explicitly mentioning that they had chosen to shop there because of the store's commitment to treating all customers with respect. "We're being held up as a model," she told Dolores during their weekly update call, "which is ironic, considering how we started this journey. But it's also creating real accountability. Everyone from our board to our newest sales associate knows we have to live up to the standards we're now publicly advocating. Bradley's transformation continued to deepen as well. Beyond his ongoing work at the community center, he had started mentoring other retail managers who reached out after watching the panel, helping them recognize and address unconscious biases in their own establishments. "It's humbling," he admitted, during a planning call for the initiative. "Every time I help someone else recognize these patterns, I become more aware of how deeply they were embedded in my own thinking and how much work I still have to do." As spring turned to summer, the media frenzy gradually subsided, but the substantive work of the Dignity Initiative continued to expand. The scholarship program was officially launched in July, with funding commitments from 20 luxury retailers and applications already coming in from promising students across the country. The training standards were being developed by a team of experts including Martha Coleman, with input from retail professionals, consumer advocates, and diversity specialists. And the certification program was taking shape, with clear benchmarks for retailers to demonstrate not just commitment, but actual implementation of inclusive practices. Through it all, Dolores maintained her role as an advisor, offering wisdom and perspective drawn from her decades of life experience, but carefully avoiding becoming the public face of the initiative. That role increasingly fell to Bradley, whose openness about his own journey from bias to awareness made him an effective spokesperson for the possibility of genuine change. One evening in early August, as Dolores sat on her porch watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk, her phone rang with a call from Victoria. "Mrs. Jordan," Victoria said, her voice vibrant with excitement, "I wanted you to be the first to know. The Council of Fashion Designers of America has decided to adopt our training standards as part of their industry guidelines. This means every major designer in America will be encouraged to implement the practices we've developed." "That's wonderful news," Dolores replied sincerely. "It suggests the impact will extend well beyond individual stores." "It's all because of you," Victoria continued. "Your dignity in the face of disrespect, your wisdom in transforming that moment into an opportunity for growth rather than just punishment. It's changed everything, not just for Platinum Elite, but potentially for an entire industry." After they hung up, Dolores remained on the porch, contemplating how far this journey had taken them from its unexpected beginning. What had started as a painful rejection had somehow become the catalyst for meaningful change, not just in one store or for one customer, but potentially for countless others whose names she would never know. The news was spreading, carrying with it not just the story of what had happened at Platinum Elite, but the possibility that dignity, once recognized as a universal human right rather than an earned privilege, might transform relationships far beyond the world of luxury, retail. And in that possibility lay the fulfillment of what James had always believed, that our most difficult experiences often contain the seeds of our most significant contributions. If we have the wisdom to nurture those seeds with dignity rather than bitterness, with purpose rather than resentment, with a commitment to improving the future rather than merely rectifying the past. The ripples from the Platinum Elite incident continued to spread throughout the summer and into early fall. What had begun as a personal slight in a Chicago boutique had evolved into a movement that was reshaping practices across the luxury retail industry. Dolores watched this transformation with quiet amazement, still somewhat uncomfortable with her role as catalyst, but increasingly convinced of the importance of the work being done. In late August, the National Retail Federation held a special summit in Chicago focused on inclusive customer service practices. Industry leaders from across the country gathered to discuss implementation of the Dignity Initiative guidelines. Though Dolores had initially declined to attend, Michael persuaded her that her presence would lend weight to the proceedings. "You don't have to speak," he assured her. "Just being there will remind everyone that this isn't about abstract policies. It's about real people and real experiences." The summit was held at a downtown hotel just blocks from Platinum Elite. As Dolores entered the conference center on the first morning, she was stunned by the turnout. Over 300 retail executives, store managers, and customer service trainers filled the main hall, with another 200 participating virtually. Victoria met her at the entrance, elegant, as always in a tailored suit, the small silver door pin that had become Platinum Elite's symbol of inclusion gleaming on her lapel. "Mrs. Jordan," she said warmly, embracing Dolores, "thank you for coming. You won't believe the interest this has generated. We had to close registration 2 weeks ago because we reached capacity." As they moved through the crowded lobby, Dolores noticed something surprising. Many of the attendees were wearing pins similar to Victoria's, though each retail organization had created its own unique design around the same theme of open doors and welcome. "It's become something of a movement," Victoria explained, noticing Dolores's observation. "Retailers are developing symbols to communicate their commitment to inclusive practices, not just to customers, but to their own staff as reminders of their values." The opening session featured a panel of retail executives discussing how they were implementing the Dignity Initiative guidelines in their own establishments. The CEO of a major department store chain described how they had completely revamped their employee incentive structure, shifting from a focus on sales volume to customer satisfaction across all demographics. "We're measuring success differently now," he explained. "It's not just about how much merchandise moves off the shelves. It's about whether every customer feels valued during their shopping experience, regardless of how they're dressed or what they ultimately purchase." A luxury handbag designer shared how her company had instituted a reverse shopping exercise as part of their training, sending sales associates into stores where they might feel out of place or judged based on their appearance. "It's transformative," she said. "Experiencing firsthand what it feels like to be dismissed or overlooked has completely changed how our team approaches customer service." Throughout the morning sessions, Dolores noticed Bradley moving through the crowd, engaged in intense conversations with various attendees. He had become something of a celebrity within the industry, not because of his privileged position as a luxury store manager, but because of his willingness to acknowledge past mistakes and embrace genuine change. During the lunch break, Dolores found a quiet corner where she could observe without being the center of attention. To her surprise, Martha Coleman joined her, maneuvering carefully with her cane through the crowded dining area. "Quite something, isn't it?" Martha said, settling into the chair beside Dolores. All these fancy retailers suddenly discovering the value of basic human dignity. Her tone was wry, but not bitter. "Do you think it's sincere?" Dolores asked, valuing the older woman's perspective. "Or just good publicity?" Martha considered the question. "Both, probably, in varying degrees, depending on the individual. But sincerity isn't always the most important measure of progress. Sometimes behavior changes first, and hearts follow later." She gestured toward Bradley, who was now engaged in animated conversation with a group of young sales associates from various high-end stores. "Take your friend Bradley there. Did he start this journey with the purest of intentions? Hardly. He was trying to save his job and his reputation. But somewhere along the way, the experience became genuine for him." Dolores nodded thoughtfully. "That's true of most growth, I suppose. We rarely choose our most transformative experiences. They choose us." "Exactly," Martha agreed. "And that's what makes this movement potentially sustainable. It didn't start with corporate consultants creating a top-down diversity initiative. It started with a real human encounter that exposed a systemic problem, followed by a thoughtful response that offered a path toward genuine change. After lunch, the summit shifted to workshop sessions where attendees could learn specific implementation strategies for the Dignity Initiative guidelines. Dolores chose to attend a session led by Bradley, curious to see how he had developed as a trainer. The room was packed with retail managers eager to learn from someone who had become the unexpected face of transformation in their industry. Bradley began not with PowerPoint slides or abstract principles, but with a starkly honest account of his interaction with Dolores at Platinum Elite, the assumptions he had made, the condescension he had displayed, and the consequences of his behavior. "I'm not here as an expert who has it all figured out," he told the group. "I'm here as someone who got it terribly wrong, who hurt another human being through my arrogance and prejudice, and who is still learning every day how to do better." From Ayers, that foundation of humility, Bradley guided the participants through exercises designed to help them recognize their own unconscious biases and develop strategies for ensuring equitable treatment of all customers. The approach was practical rather than theoretical, focused on specific behaviors and systems rather than abstract concepts. Watching from the back of the room, Dolores felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in how far Bradley had come, hope for the changes being implemented across the industry, and a lingering trace of the hurt she had experienced that day in Chicago. But mostly, she felt gratitude that something positive had emerged from that painful encounter. During the afternoon break, she slipped out of the hotel, wanting a few moments of quiet reflection. Without consciously planning it, her steps led her toward Michigan Avenue and eventually to the gleaming storefront of Platinum Elite. The exterior looked exactly as it had during her previous visits, but as she approached the entrance, she noticed subtle differences. A small plaque beside the door displayed the words, "All are welcome," in elegant script, and the mannequins in the window showcased an array of styles that went beyond the typical luxury aesthetic, suggesting a more inclusive vision of sophistication. Dolores hesitated, unsure whether to enter. Her previous visits had been emotionally charged, first with humiliation, then with the tension of confrontation and resolution. But curiosity won out, and she pushed open the heavy glass door. The soft chime announcing her arrival sounded the same, but the response was markedly different. A young sales associate approached immediately, her manner warm and professional. "Good afternoon," she said with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Platinum Elite. How may I assist you today?" "I'm just browsing, thank you," Dolores replied, curious to see how the interaction would unfold. "Of course," the associate said. "Please take your time. My name is Sarah if you have any questions." As Dolores moved through the store, she noticed other small but significant changes. The displays featured a more diverse range of styles, from classic luxury pieces to more contemporary designs. The staff, while still impeccably professional, interacted with customers in a manner that was attentive without being intrusive or judgmental. Near the watch counter where her original encounter with Bradley had occurred, Dolores paused, memories flooding back. The same glass cases displayed exquisite timepieces on velvet cushions, but the atmosphere felt different, more genuinely welcoming rather than artificially exclusive. "Mrs. Jordan," a voice said softly behind her. "What a wonderful surprise." She turned to find Victoria approaching, her expression one of pleased surprise rather than the mortification that had characterized their first meeting. "I was attending the summit," Dolores explained, "and found myself walking this way during the break." Victoria nodded understanding. "I'm glad you came in. We've made many changes since your last visit, not just in policies and training, but in the entire culture of the store. I'd love to show you, if you have a few minutes." For the next half hour, Victoria guided Dolores through the transformed Platinum Elite. Beyond the visible changes in displays and staff interactions, she described the systemic shifts that had reshaped how the store operated, from hiring practices to training protocols to performance metrics. "Our sales have actually increased by 23%, Victoria noted as they completed their tour. It turns out that creating a genuinely welcoming environment is good for business as well as being the right thing to do. Before Dolores left to return to the summit, Victoria gestured toward a discreet display near the entrance that Dolores had missed on her way in. It showcased photographs and brief biographies of pioneering entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds who had made significant contributions to the worlds of fashion, jewelry, and luxury goods. "This is our newest addition," Victoria explained. "We're calling it the Legacy Wall. It's a reminder to our staff and our customers that excellence and innovation come from all backgrounds and communities, not just the privileged few." Dolores studied the display with interest, recognizing some names and discovering others for the first time. "This is wonderful," she said sincerely. "It changes the narrative about who belongs in spaces like this." "That's exactly the intention," Victoria agreed. "And we're expanding it quarterly, adding new stories and perspectives." As Dolores prepared to leave, Victoria reached into her pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Before you go," she said, "I have something for you. The board of directors asked me to present this officially at tonight's dinner, but I'd rather give it to you privately." Inside the box was a pin identical to the one Victoria wore. The silver door, half open, with "Dignity Opens Doors" engraved on its surface. But this one was crafted in platinum rather than silver, with a small diamond set into the center. "You're our inspiration," Victoria said simply. "The first recipient of what will become an annual recognition for individuals who advance the cause of dignity and inclusion in retail environments." Dolores accepted the pin with quiet grace, touched by the gesture but still somewhat uncomfortable with public recognition. "Thank you," she said, "though I never sought to become the face of this movement." "That's precisely why you're the perfect symbol for it," Victoria replied. "You stood for dignity, not because you wanted attention or accolades, but because it was the right thing to do." Back at the summit that afternoon, Dolores found herself approached by retail executives and store managers from across the country, each eager to share how they were implementing the Dignity Initiative guidelines in their own establishments. What struck her most was the variety of approaches, from major department store chains to small boutiques, each finding ways to adapt the core principles to their specific contexts. A luxury shoe designer from New York described how they had completely revamped their visual merchandising to feature diverse representations of elegance and style. A jewelry store owner from Miami shared how they had partnered with a local community college to create internship opportunities for students from underrepresented backgrounds. But most meaningful to Dolores were the personal stories. Retail professionals at various levels who confessed that the initiative had caused them to confront their own biases and change their behavior, not just at work, but in their broader lives. As the summit's final session concluded, the organizers surprised Dolores by asking all attendees who were wearing the various open door pins to stand. Nearly everyone in the room rose to their feet, hundreds of retail professionals publicly signaling their commitment to treating every customer with equal respect, regardless of appearance or background. It was a powerful visual representation of how far the movement had spread beyond one store and one incident. What had begun as a painful rejection had somehow catalyzed meaningful change across an entire industry. not through public shaming or retribution, but through education, transformation, and a shared commitment to human dignity. That evening, at the summit's closing dinner, Dolores found herself seated between Michael and Martha Coleman at the head table. As the meal concluded, the National Retail Federation's president approached the podium to make a special announcement. "Today, we are proud to unveil the next phase of the Dignity Initiative," she declared. "Thanks to commitments from over 50 major retailers and design houses, we have secured full funding for 100 scholarships over the next 5 years for students from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing careers in retail management, fashion design, and luxury brand marketing." The room erupted in applause, with many attendees rising to their feet in support of the ambitious expansion. Additionally, the president continued once the applause subsided, "We are establishing a certification program through which retail establishments can demonstrate their commitment to inclusive practices. Those who meet the standards will display a special emblem indicating that all customers can expect to be treated with equal respect in their establishments." As Dolores listened to these announcements, she was struck by how the initiative had evolved from addressing a specific incident to creating systemic change with far-reaching implications. What had begun as one woman's stand for personal dignity had become a movement that might transform how countless others experienced the retail environment. Later that night, as she prepared for bed in her hotel room, Dolores found herself thinking of James. As she often did at the end of meaningful days, she could almost hear his voice commenting on how this unexpected journey had unfolded, his gentle wisdom putting it all in perspective. "CD," she imagined him saying, using his special nickname for her, "you never know which small act of dignity will be the one that changes things. You just keep standing in your truth, and sometimes the world notices and starts to change around you." The Dignity Initiative had indeed moved beyond one store, beyond one incident, beyond even the luxury retail sector. It had become a conversation about fundamental human worth and respect, about seeing the person behind the appearance, about honoring the dignity inherent in every human being regardless of external markers of status or wealth. And in that expansion lay the fulfillment of what Dolores and James had always hoped to teach their children. That transformative change begins not with grand gestures or public protests, but with individual choices to stand firm in one's inherent dignity and to recognize that same worth in others, even, perhaps especially, when society's systems and structures fail to do so. 6 months after the Dignity Initiative's launch, Platinum Elite prepared for a special event unveiling their fully transformed store. The boutique had been closed for 2 weeks for renovations. Not just cosmetic changes, but a complete reimagining of the space to reflect their renewed commitment to inclusive luxury. Dolores received a formal invitation embossed with the now familiar open door emblem that had become the symbol of the movement. Victoria had called personally to extend the invitation, explaining that while the event would include industry leaders and media representatives, it would maintain the dignity and substance that Dolores valued. "This isn't about publicity," Victoria had assured her. "It's about marking a genuine transformation and inspiring others to follow the same path." After careful consideration, Dolores agreed to attend, recognizing the importance of witnessing this culmination of the journey that had begun with her rejection at the store. Michael arranged for his private jet to take her from Wilmington to Chicago, insisting on accompanying her despite his busy schedule. "I wouldn't miss this," he told her. "Not after everything that's led to this moment." The evening of the unveiling arrived cold but clear, with stars visible above Chicago's glittering skyline. As their car approached Michigan Avenue, Dolores noticed the Platinum Elite storefront was elegantly draped, concealing the renovations until the official reveal. A small crowd had gathered outside, not just invited guests, but curious passers-by, attracted by the understated elegance of the preparations. Michael helped Dolores from the car, his protective presence a comfort as they navigated through photographers and attendees. Victoria greeted them at a private entrance, elegant as always, in a simple but exquisite dress. The platinum "Dignity Opens Doors" pin gleamed at her lapel, matching the one Dolores had chosen to wear for this special occasion. "Mrs. Jordan?" "Michael," Victoria said warmly. "Thank you for coming. Everything is ready for the unveiling. We just need our guest of honor." Inside, the store hummed with anticipation. About 100 invited guests mingled in the draped interior. Retail industry leaders, fashion journalists, community representatives, and a special group Dolores hadn't expected. Seniors from the Southside Community Center, where Bradley had been volunteering, including Martha Coleman leaning on her cane but resplendent in a vintage dress from the 1960s. Bradley approached, his transformation still striking to Dolores. Gone was the slick, condescending sales manager she had first encountered. In his place stood a man whose genuine warmth and humility had become his most noticeable characteristics. "Mrs. Jordan," he said, taking her hand respectfully. "I can't tell you what it means to have you here tonight. None of this would have happened without you." "I think it would have eventually," Dolores replied kindly. "Someone else would have stood up if I hadn't." Bradley shook his head. "Perhaps, but it was your specific response, choosing education over humiliation, transformation over punishment, that created this particular path. Many people would have responded with public shaming or demands for firing. You chose something more profound." Before Dolores could respond, Victoria gently guided them toward the center of the store, where a small platform had been set up. It was time for the formal unveiling. As Dolores took her place beside Michael, she noticed other familiar faces in the crowd. Scottie Pippen had come to support them, along with several of Michael's former teammates. Jeffrey and Jasmine had flown in from Washington and North Carolina, respectively. Even Larry and Sharon had made the trip, bringing the family's support in full force. Victoria stepped onto the platform first, welcoming the guests and briefly recounting the journey that had brought them to this moment, not dwelling on the negative aspects of the original incident, but focusing on the transformative response it had sparked. 6 months ago, she said, Platinum Elite was merely a luxury boutique. Today, we reopen as something more, a space where excellence in craft meets excellence in human interaction, where true luxury is defined not just by the quality of our merchandise, but by the dignity with which we treat every person who walks through our doors. She then invited Bradley to speak. With evident emotion, he shared his personal journey from bias to awareness, from judgment to understanding. He spoke directly about his volunteer work at the community center and how it had fundamentally changed his perspective on human value and worth. "I used to measure people by what they wore, what they drove, what address they gave," he admitted. "Frankly, now I understand that those external markers tell you almost nothing about a person's character, intelligence, or actual resources, and absolutely nothing about their inherent dignity as a human being." Martha Coleman spoke next, providing historical and economic context for the patterns of discrimination that had long characterized luxury retail environments. Her academic perspective lent weight to the evening, elevating it from a store reopening to a meaningful cultural moment. Then, to Dolores's surprise, Victoria invited her to speak. Though not prepared with formal remarks, Dolores stepped forward with the quiet confidence that had carried her through 7 decades of life's challenges. "I never sought to become part of a movement," she began simply. "I just wanted to buy A graduation gift for my granddaughter without being judged by my appearance. But sometimes, life places us in situations that reveal larger truths. In this case, that dignity isn't something to be earned through wealth or status, but the birthright of every human being. She spoke briefly but powerfully about James and the values they had instilled in their children, about standing firm in one's own worth while recognizing that same worth in others, about responding to disrespect with dignity rather than defensiveness, about transforming painful experiences into opportunities for growth. What has happened here, she concluded, goes beyond one store or one incident. It speaks to how we see and treat each other in all aspects of life. Whether we recognize the full humanity in every person we encounter, or reduce them to superficial judgments based on appearance. After warm applause, Victoria stepped forward for the actual unveiling. "And now," she announced, "we present the transformed Platinum Elite, reimagined not just in design, but in purpose." At her signal, staff members simultaneously removed the drapes covering the interior, revealing the stunning transformation. The store had been completely redesigned, maintaining its luxury aesthetic but with a warmer, more inclusive atmosphere. The lighting was softer, the displays more accessible, the overall environment more welcoming while still conveying exceptional quality and craftsmanship. But the most striking change was the legacy wall that Dolores had glimpsed in its early stages. Now expanded to become a central feature of the store, it showcased the contributions of diverse innovators to the worlds of fashion, jewelry, and luxury goods throughout history. Interactive digital displays allowed customers to learn about these pioneers, many of whom had overcome significant barriers of prejudice and exclusion to create enduring legacies of excellence. Beside the legacy wall stood a new addition Dolores hadn't seen before, a display case featuring photographs and brief biographies of the first 10 recipients of the Dignity Initiative scholarships, young people from diverse backgrounds who were now pursuing education and careers in retail, design, and luxury brand management. As guests explored the transformed space, Dolores found herself drawn to this display, studying the faces and stories of these scholarship recipients. One young woman particularly caught her attention, Maya Johnson, who had grown up in the same Chicago South Side neighborhood where Bradley now volunteered. Her biography mentioned that she had been inspired to study luxury brand management after a community center volunteer recognized her talent for design and encouraged her to pursue it professionally. "That's Bradley's mentee," Martha Coleman said, appearing beside Dolores with a knowing smile. "He spotted her sketching handbag designs during one of our community center art programs. Now she's at Parsons on a full scholarship, with an internship lined up here next summer." Dolores felt a wave of emotion at this tangible evidence of how the ripples had spread. From her painful rejection to Bradley's transformation to this young woman's opportunity. It was exactly the kind of positive chain reaction that she and James had always believed in, small acts of dignity and respect compounding over time to create meaningful change. The formal program concluded with Victoria unveiling one final addition to the store, a discreet plaque near the entrance that read, "Platinum Elite is committed to treating every person who enters these doors with equal dignity and respect, regardless of appearance or background. True luxury is found not in exclusivity, but in excellence of both product and human interaction." Beneath these words was a quote that brought tears to Dolores's eyes. "Dignity isn't something to be earned through wealth or status. It's the birthright of every human being." Dolores Jordan. As the evening continued with celebration and conversation, Dolores found herself approached by many guests, each expressing appreciation for her role in sparking this transformation. But what touched her most deeply were the comments from the community center seniors whom Bradley had invited. "That young man has become like family to us," one elderly gentleman told her, nodding toward Bradley, who was now introducing Maya to a group of fashion industry executives. "At first we thought he was just putting in time to save his job. But he's truly changed, and he's changing others too." Later, as the crowd thinned and the formal event transitioned to a more relaxed gathering, Dolores found a quiet moment to naidi toad stand before the legacy wall, absorbing the stories of those who had persevered against prejudice to create lasting contributions to their fields. Michael joined her, pride evident in his expression as he looked at his mother. "What are you thinking?" "About, Mom? Your father," she replied honestly. "How he always said that true change starts with individual choices, to stand in your dignity and recognize the dignity in others." "He was right," Michael agreed, his voice soft with memory. "As usual. I just never imagined a simple shopping trip would lead to all this," Dolores continued, gesturing to the transformed store around them. "It wasn't simple, though, was it?" Michael observed. "It was a moment that revealed something fundamental about how people see and treat each other. And your response created a path forward that others could follow." As they prepared to leave, Victoria approached with a small gift bag bearing the Platinum Elite logo. "A small token of appreciation," she explained, handing it to Dolores, "though nothing could adequately express what your wisdom and grace have meant to all of us." Later, in the privacy of her hotel suite, Dolores opened the gift. Inside was an exquisite watch, not the one she had originally tried to purchase for Jasmine, but a unique piece created especially for this occasion. On its mother-of-pearl face was the now familiar open door emblem, and engraved on the back were the words, "Time reveals character. Dignity creates legacy. With profound gratitude. VP and the Platinum Elite family." Dolores fastened the watch on her wrist, appreciating its beauty, but valuing far more the transformation it represented. Not just of a store or an industry, but of human hearts and minds, awakening to the recognition that dignity transcends appearances, that worth isn't determined by wealth, that respect shouldn't be rationed based on external judgments. The unveiling had been more than a store renovation or a public relations event. It had been a visible manifestation of an invisible truth that Dolores and James had always believed and taught. That transformative change begins with individual choices to honor the dignity in oneself and others. That small acts of principled courage ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict, and that standing firm in your inherent worth can illuminate that same worth in others, even those who initially fail to recognize it. As Dolores prepared for bed, she placed the watch carefully on the nightstand beside the photo of James she always traveled with. Looking at his beloved face, she whispered, "We planted seeds, James, and they're growing into something beautiful." As the Chicago winter settled in, bringing early snow flurries that dusted Michigan Avenue, with white Platinum Elite prepared for the holiday shopping season. The store had been transformed not just physically, but fundamentally in its approach to customer service. What had once been an environment of exclusivity and judgment had become a space where excellence in craft coexisted with excellence in human interaction. Dolores followed these developments from her quiet home in Wilmington, through weekly update, calls with Victoria, and occasional messages from Bradley. She had declined further public appearances, preferring to serve as an advisor behind the scenes, while others carried the visible work of the Dignity Initiative forward. The initiative itself had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Nearly 200 luxury retailers across the country had adopted the training standards and committed to the certification process. The scholarship program had expanded to 15 recipients in its first year, with funding secured for 5 years of continued growth. And the open door emblem had become recognized within the industry as a signal that customers could expect to be treated with respect regardless of their appearance. On a crisp December morning, Dolores received an unexpected call from Jasmine. "Grandma," her granddaughter said excitedly, "I have the best news. I've been offered a position with the Dignity Initiative after graduation. They want me to help develop their youth outreach program, connecting with high school students from underrepresented communities who might be interested in fashion and retail careers." Dolores felt a surge of pride and joy. "That's wonderful. Sweetheart, it sounds perfect for you." "There's more," Jasmine continued. "Part of the job involves working directly with the scholarship recipients. And guess where the first training session will be held?" "Where?" Dolores asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Platinum Elite in Chicago," Jasmine confirmed. "And they've asked if you would come speak to the students. Just a small, private session. No media, no publicity." Bradley thought hearing directly from you about dignity and perseverance would be invaluable for these young people starting their careers. Dolores hesitated. She had deliberately stepped back from public involvement with the initiative, preferring to let others carry it forward. But this request was different, intimate rather than public, focused on supporting young people rather than publicity. "When would this be?" she asked. 2 weeks from now," Jasmine replied. "I can fly down and accompany you if you'd like. Dad already offered his jet." After thoughtful consideration, Dolores agreed. This opportunity to directly encourage young people embracing careers in an industry that had once excluded them felt like an appropriate completion of the circle that had begun with her rejection at the store. 2 weeks later, Dolores and Jasmine arrived in Chicago on a snowy afternoon. The city was decorated for the holidays, with Michigan Avenue transformed by twinkling lights and festive displays. As their car approached Platinum Elite, Dolores felt a flutter of emotion, remembering her first visit and all that had unfolded since. The store was closed to regular customers for this special event. When they entered, Dolores was greeted warmly by Victoria and Bradley, both wearing their now familiar "Dignity Opens Doors" pins. But her attention was immediately drawn to the 15 young people gathered near the legacy wall, the scholarship recipients, ranging in age from 18 to 23, representing diverse backgrounds and communities. "Mrs. Jordan," Victoria said with evident emotion, "thank you for coming. These young people have been looking forward to meeting you." One by one, the scholarship recipients introduced themselves, each sharing not just their name and educational focus, but how the Dignity Initiative had impacted their lives. Their stories were varied, but unified by threads of hope, opportunity, and recognition of their inherent worth and potential. Maya Johnson, the young woman Bradley had mentored from the Southside Community Center, spoke last. Now completing her first semester at Parsons, she described how Bradley's recognition of her talent had opened doors she hadn't known existed. "Before meeting Mr. Williams, I never imagined someone like me could work in luxury fashion," she explained. "Not because I doubted my ability, but because I didn't see anyone who looked like me in those spaces. Now I understand that I don't just belong there. I can help transform those spaces to become more inclusive while maintaining the excellence that defines true luxury." After the introductions, the group gathered in Platinum Elite's elegantly appointed training room. At Victoria's gentle encouragement, Dolores shared her perspective on dignity, drawing not just from the incident at the store, but from her decades of life experience. "Dignity isn't just about how others treat you," she told the attentive young people. "It's about how you carry yourself regardless of that treatment. My late husband James used to say that no one can diminish your worth unless you give them that power. She spoke of raising 5 children during the civil rights era, of teaching them to stand firm in their inherent value even when society questioned it, of maintaining dignity through both triumph and tragedy. Without mentioning Michael by name, she described how she had navigated the challenges of sudden fame and fortune that affected their family, staying grounded in the values that had guided them through leaner times. The true measure of dignity, she concluded, isn't in how you respond when everything is going well, but in how you conduct yourself when faced with disrespect or dismissal. That's when your character reveals itself most clearly. The students asked thoughtful questions, not just about the incident at Platinum Elite, but about Dolores's broader life experiences and the wisdom she had gained through them. She answered with the same quiet grace that had characterized her response to the original rejection, offering insights without dogmatism, suggestions rather than prescriptions. As the formal session concluded and the group moved to a reception area for refreshments, Bradley approached Dolores with an unexpected request. "Mrs. Jordan," he said, his manner respectful but earnest. "There's something I'd like to show you, if you have a few minutes. It's at the jewelry counter." Curious, Dolores followed him to the very spot where their first encounter had occurred. The counter looked much the same, elegant glass cases displaying exquisite watches and jewelry on velvet cushions. But Bradley directed her attention to a specific display she hadn't noticed before. Inside was the silver watch with the mother-of-pearl face that she had originally tried to purchase for Jasmine. The very piece that Bradley had suggested she couldn't afford. Beside it was a small placard that read, "The Dolores Collection, where dignity meets design." Bradley explained that this was the first piece in a new line being developed in partnership with an up-and-coming Black female designer. A portion of the proceeds from each sale would go directly to the scholarship fund, creating a self-sustaining cycle of support for future students. "We wanted to transform something painful into something productive," he said, "to acknowledge our past failure while creating a path toward a better future." Dolores studied the watch, its elegant design, its perfect craftsmanship, its symbolic transformation from an object of rejection to a source of opportunity for others. It perfectly embodied the journey they had all taken over the past year. "It's beautiful," she said simply, "both the watch and what it represents." As they rejoined the group, Dolores found herself in conversation with Maya Johnson, the young design student from the South Side. Maya shyly showed Dolores sketches for handbags she was developing as part of her coursework, designs that blended traditional luxury aesthetics with cultural influences from her African-American heritage. "These are extraordinary," Dolores said sincerely, recognizing genuine talent in the young woman's work. "You have a remarkable eye for both beauty and meaning." Maya's expression brightened at the validation. "Thank you, Mrs. Jordan. That means a lot coming from you." She hesitated, then added, "Can I ask you something personal?" When Dolores nodded encouragement, Maya continued, "How did you find the strength to respond the way you did? With dignity instead of anger, with a desire to create change rather than just demand justice for yourself?" It was a profound question, one that went to the heart of Dolores's character and life philosophy. She considered it carefully before responding. "I've lived long enough to learn that anger, while sometimes justified, rarely creates the change you want to see," she said thoughtfully. "It might force short-term adjustments, but it doesn't transform hearts and minds. That requires a different approach, one that appeals to the better nature that exists in most people, even when it's obscured by prejudice or thoughtlessness." She paused, remembering James's words on this very subject. My husband used to say, "The true strength isn't in how hard you can push back against those who wrong you, but in whether you can maintain your own dignity while helping them recognize theirs." That's the path I've tried to walk throughout my life, with varying degrees of success. As their conversation concluded, Victoria approached with a small box wrapped in elegant paper. "We have something for you," she said to Dolores. "A token of appreciation for everything you've done. Not just for Platinum Elite, but for all these young people whose paths you've helped to shape." Inside was a delicate bracelet that matched the watch Dolores had been given at the unveiling ceremony. But this piece featured an additional charm, a small silver key beside the now familiar open door emblem. "The door represents opportunity," Victoria explained, "but the key represents the wisdom that unlocks that opportunity for others. That's what you've given us, Mrs. Jordan. Not just a moment of accountability, but the wisdom to transform that moment into lasting change." As Dolores fastened the bracelet beside the watch on her wrist, she was struck by how perfectly these symbols captured the journey from painful rejection to purposeful transformation. What had begun as a simple shopping trip had evolved into a movement affecting hundreds of lives directly and potentially thousands more indirectly. Later that afternoon, as the session with the scholarship recipients concluded, Dolores found herself alone at the jewelry counter where everything had started. The store would reopen to the public in 30 minutes, and staff were making final preparations. Bradley and Victoria were engaged in conversation with Jasmine across the room, discussing her upcoming role with the initiative. A young female sales associate approached Dolores. "Can I help you with anything, ma'am?" she asked, her manner naturally respectful without any hint of the condescension that had characterized Dolores's first visit. "Yes," Dolores replied on impulse. "I'd like to purchase that watch, please." She pointed to the silver timepiece with the mother-of-pearl face from the Dolores collection. If the associate recognized her connection to the collection, she gave no sign, maintaining professional courtesy as she removed the watch from the display and placed it on a velvet pad for Dolores to examine. "It's a beautiful piece," she explained knowledgeably. "Part of our new Dolores collection that supports scholarships for students from underrepresented communities. The mother-of-pearl face is sourced from sustainable operations in the South Pacific, and the movement is Swiss, hand-assembled by master craftsmen." Dolores smiled at the parallel to her original visit, appreciating how different the interaction felt this time, characterized by genuine respect rather than judgment, by information freely given rather than condescendingly withheld. "I'll take it," she said. "It's a graduation gift for my granddaughter." The transaction proceeded smoothly, the associate treating Dolores with the same professionalism and courtesy she would offer any customer. When Victoria noticed what was happening and hurried over, clearly planning to insist the watch be a gift, Dolores raised a hand to stop her. "No, Victoria," she said firmly but kindly. "Respect means allowing me the dignity of purchasing this gift for my granddaughter properly." Victoria understood immediately, nodding agreement and stepping back to allow the transaction to complete. Normally, when the associate handed Dolores the elegantly wrapped package, their eyes met in a moment of simple human connection. Merchant and customer, each respecting the other's role and dignity. As Dolores and Jasmine left the store, the Badrita younger woman noticed tears in her grandmother's eyes. "Grandma?" she asked with concern. "Are you okay?" Dolores smiled, blinking back the moisture. "Yes, dear. Just feeling grateful for how things have come full circle. A year ago, I left this store in tears of humiliation. Today, I leave with tears of satisfaction." she handed the wrapped package to her granddaughter. "This is for your graduation. The watch I originally tried to buy you that day." Jasmine accepted it with evident emotion, understanding the significance of this gift that had sparked such an unexpected journey. "Thank you, Grandma. I'll treasure it always, not just for what it is, but for what it represents." As they walked, arm in arm down Michigan Avenue, snow beginning to fall softly around them, Dolores thought about the watch's journey from object of rejection to symbol of transformation. It perfectly mirrored her own experience. Pain transformed into purpose, humiliation into healing, a personal slight expanded into a movement for dignity that would benefit countless others. And in that transformation lay the completion of a circle that had begun with a simple shopping trip, but had evolved into something far more meaningful, a testament to the power of standing firm in one's inherent dignity while recognizing that same worth in others, even those who initially fail to see it themselves. The winter holidays passed in a blur of family gatherings and quiet reflection for Dolores. In her Wilmington home, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, she found herself often thinking about the journey that had begun with rejection at Platinum Elite and blossomed into something far more meaningful than she could have imagined. Michael had hosted the family Christmas celebration at his Jupiter estate as usual, with all 5 Jordan children and their families, gathering for 3 days of feasting, gift-giving, and reminiscing. Throughout the festivities, Dolores noticed Jasmine wearing both the pearl necklace and the watch from the Dolores collection, symbols of family history and future promise beautifully combined. Now, in late January, Dolores sat at her kitchen table reviewing the quarterly report Victoria had sent regarding the Dignity Initiative's progress. The numbers were impressive. Over 300 retail establishments had adopted the training standards, and applications for the next round of scholarships had more than doubled. But more meaningful to Dolores were the personal stories included. In the report, testimonials from customers who had experienced notable improvements in how they were treated, and reflections from retail professionals whose perspectives had been transformed through the initiative's training programs. The phone rang, interrupting her reading. It was Michael. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and hesitation. "I've been thinking about something. The NBA All-Star Game is coming up next month in Chicago. I've been asked to present an award, and I thought maybe you might want to come with me." "That's kind of you, Michael," Dolores replied. "But you know large public events aren't really my preference these days." "I know," Michael acknowledged. "But there's something specific I wanted to share with you in Chicago. Something I've never told anyone before, not even you. And it feels like the right time." Intrigued by his unusual request and the hint of something important left unsaid, Dolores agreed. Michael's jet would collect her the day before the All-Star festivities, giving them time for whatever conversation he felt was necessary before the public events began. 3 weeks later, Dolores found herself once again approaching Chicago, watching from the plane window as the winter landscape gave way to the sprawling city beside Lake Michigan. Michael had been unusually quiet during the flight, his expression thoughtful as he periodically checked messages on his phone. They were taken directly to the Peninsula Hotel, where Michael had reserved connecting suites. After settling in, he suggested they have dinner privately in Dolores's suite rather than venturing out to a restaurant where they might be recognized. As they ate, Michael seemed distracted, his conversation drifting to memories of his childhood and early career. He asked Dolores about her memories of those years, how she had managed to keep the family grounded despite his growing fame, how she had maintained her dignity through dramatic changes in their circumstances. Finally, as they finished dessert, Michael set down his fork and looked directly at his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "there's something I've wanted to tell you for years, but the time never seemed right. After everything that's happened with Platinum Elite and the Dignity Initiative, I think maybe now it is." Dolores waited patiently, giving her son the space to gather his thoughts. "Do you remember my first big endorsement deal? The one that really changed everything financially for us?" Dolores nodded. Of course she remembered. It had transformed their lives, moving them from relative comfort to substantial wealth almost overnight. "Before that deal was finalized," Michael continued, "I had to go to New York for meetings with the company executives. I was excited, nervous, feeling like this was my big break beyond basketball itself." He paused, his expression shifting as he recalled that distant day. "I didn't have the right clothes for meetings like that. Dad took me shopping for a suit the weekend before, but I still felt out of place, like a kid playing dress-up." Dolores smiled gently at the memory of James proudly helping their son prepare for that important meeting. "When I got to New York," Michael continued, "I decided I needed something else. A nice watch. Something that would make me look professional, like I belonged in those corporate boardrooms. So I went to this high-end store on Fifth Avenue." His voice took on a different quality, and Dolores began to understand where this story was heading. "I walked in wearing the new suit, but without any of the other trappings of wealth. No fancy watch yet, no designer accessories, nothing that signaled success by their standards. And Mom," he paused, meeting her eyes directly, "they treated me exactly the way Bradley treated you at Platinum Elite." Dolores felt a jolt of surprise, followed by a wave of maternal pain at the thought of her son experiencing such dismissal. "The sales manager looked me up and down and suggested I might be more comfortable at a department store," Michael continued. "Said their watches started at prices I might not be prepared for. Didn't directly say I couldn't afford them, but made it absolutely clear that's what he meant." "Oh, Michael," Dolores said softly, "you never told me." "I was embarrassed," he admitted. "And then angry. I walked out and found another store where they treated me with respect. But I never forgot how it felt. To be judged like that, to be dismissed based solely on appearance." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "When you told me what happened at Platinum Elite, it all came flooding back. But what amazed me wasn't just the similarity of the experience, it was the difference in how we responded." "How so?" Dolores asked. "My first instinct was to go back after I became famous and shame them," Michael explained. "To walk in wearing expensive clothes, flash my credit cards, let them recognize who they'd turned away. I actually fantasized about it for years, though I never did it." He shook his head ruefully. "But you, Mom, your first thought wasn't about revenge or even personal vindication. It was about how to create meaningful change so others wouldn't face the same treatment. You saw beyond your own hurt to the larger issue and the greater opportunity." Dolores absorbed her son's words, touched by his vulnerability in sharing this long-held memory. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she asked gently. Michael sighed. "At first, as I said, I was embarrassed. Later, as my career took off, it seemed insignificant compared to everything else happening in our lives. And honestly, I wasn't proud of how long I held on to that anger, how I fantasized about putting those people in their place." He reached across the table to take her hand. "But when the Platinum Elite incident happened, when I saw how you handled it with such dignity and wisdom, I realized I had never fully processed my own experience. I had buried it rather than transformed it." "And now?" Dolores prompted softly. Now, I understand what you and Dad always tried to teach us, that dignity isn't about demanding respect for yourself, but about creating environments where everyone is treated with respect. That true strength isn't in retaliation, but in transformation. As they continued talking into the evening, Dolores was struck by the symmetry of their experiences. Mother and son both facing similar rejection, decades apart, each responding according to their understanding at the time. Where Michael had internalized the hurt and fantasized about revenge, Dolores had seen an opportunity for education and growth. The difference wasn't in their inherent character, but in the wisdom that comes with age and experience. The next morning, Michael had a suggestion that surprised her. "Would you be willing to visit that store with me today? The one where I was rejected all those years ago? It's still there on Fifth Avenue, though under different ownership now." Dolores considered the request carefully. She understood the symbolic importance it held for her son. A chance to fully release an old wound by revisiting its source with new perspective. "Yes," she said simply, "I think that would be good for both of us." Though they were in Chicago, for the All-Star festivities, Michael arranged for his private jet to take them to New York for the day. A 6-hour round trip that would allow them to return in time for evening events. They landed at a private airfield and were driven directly to Fifth Avenue. Michael unusually quiet throughout the journey. The store was even more opulent than Platinum Elite had been, with uniformed doormen and security personnel discreetly positioned near the entrance. As they approached, Dolores could feel Michael's tension in the way he walked beside her. Protective, but also somehow vulnerable. Inside, the atmosphere was one of hushed exclusivity. Soft, classical music. Plush, carpeting that muffled footsteps. Display cases gleaming under carefully directed lighting. Several well-dressed sales associates moved among the sparse clientele, their manner attentive but reserved. Despite Michael's international fame, no one immediately recognized him in his casual attire. A deliberate choice, Dolores suspected, to parallel his appearance during that long-ago visit. They browsed quietly for several minutes before an associate approached. "Good morning," the young man said pleasantly. "Welcome to Harrington's. How may I assist you today?" His manner was professional and courteous, neither obsequious nor condescending. Dolores watched as Michael studied the young man's face, perhaps searching for echoes of the sales manager who had dismissed him years earlier. "We're just looking at watches," Michael replied. "Nothing specific in mind yet." "Of course," the associate said. "Please take your time. Our timepieces are arranged by collection. Traditional designs to your left, contemporary to your right. If you have any questions, my name is David." As the young man moved away to assist another customer, Michael turned to his mother with a small smile. "Different from my first visit," he observed quietly. They spent nearly an hour in the store, examining various watches and engaging in conversation with David, who provided information without pressure or judgment. Whether he eventually recognized Michael or simply treated all customers with equal respect was impossible to determine. As they prepared to leave, Michael made an unexpected decision. He selected an elegant watch from one of the display cases, not for himself, but as a gift for Bradley Williams. A reminder, he explained to Dolores as they left the store, that transformation is always possible, that our past mistakes don't have to define our future actions. During the flight back to Chicago, Michael seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing his long-held secret had released a burden he hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. Their conversation flowed easily between past and present, personal memories and broader reflections on the changes they had witnessed through the Dignity Initiative. "You know," Michael said as they approached Chicago, What happened to both of us in those stores was wrong. But your response created something positive that will affect countless people we'll never even meet. That's a legacy that goes beyond basketball records or business success. Dolores smiled at her son, hearing in his words the values she and James had worked so hard to instill in their children. That's all your father and I ever wanted, for our children to understand that true success isn't measured by fame or wealth, but by how you affect the lives around you, by whether you leave the world a little better than you found it. The next evening, at a private reception before the All-Star game, Michael presented Bradley Williams with the watch he had purchased in New York. Bradley was visibly moved by the gift and its symbolism. One man who had judged others by appearance, giving a meaningful token to another who had done the same but found a path to transformation. "Full circle," Bradley said softly as he fastened the watch on his wrist. "From judgment to understanding, from exclusion to welcome. From rejection to revelation," Dolores added, thinking of how her painful experience and Michael's long-hidden memory had combined to create something neither could have accomplished alone. As they took their seats for the game, surrounded by celebrities, athletes, and dignitaries, Dolores reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a simple shopping trip had evolved into a movement for dignity and respect that was transforming an entire industry. What had started as a personal slight had become a catalyst for changes affecting thousands of lives. And most meaningful of all, her son's revelation had shown that their experiences, though decades apart, had been connected by invisible threads of shared humanity, the universal desire to be seen, respected, and valued for who we are rather than how we appear. In that connection lay the deepest fulfillment of what Dolores and James had always believed and taught their children, that our response to injustice matters more than the injustice itself, that dignity maintained in the face of disrespect creates possibilities for transformation that anger or retribution never could, and that standing firm in our inherent worth illuminates that same worth in others, even those who initially fail to see it themselves. As the lights dimmed and the players were introduced to thunderous applause, Dolores sat beside her son, their journey having come full circle from rejection to revelation, from personal pain to purposeful transformation. And in that circle lay the promise that had guided their family through triumph and tragedy alike, that dignity recognized and respected creates ripples of positive change that extend far beyond our individual lives, touching hearts and transforming systems in ways we may never fully know. That was the end of our heartwarming story about Dolores Jordan's remarkable experience and how it sparked a movement for dignity and respect. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to know what part of the world you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed this inspiring story about standing firm in your dignity while helping others find theirs, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting content like this. Don't forget to share with your friends and family. Stories of kindness and grace like Dolores Jordan's deserve to be spread far and wide. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve, regardless of appearances. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.